So this second interim committee of the Select Committee on School Facilities will come to order. We want to remind everyone, please, if you have any electronic devices, to either silence them or turn them off so that they don't bother us during our meeting. Also, I want to thank everyone for attending today. I understand that the seats that you're sitting in may be a little bit tough. I've heard that the room across the way has padded seats, and maybe next time we'll be meeting in there, but I thank you for attending. First thing, before we begin, let's start with a roll call, please.
Senator Hutchings?
Here.
Senator Cost?
Here.
Senator Landon?
Here.
Senator Rothfuss?
I see his backpack here, but I'm not sure he's here, so let's excuse him for now.
Okay. Representative Banks?
Here.
Representative Harshman?
Excused?
Representative Jennings?
Here.
Representative Walters?
Here.
Chairman Senator Vice Chairman Representative Brown?
Excused?
And Chairman Senator Pappas.
Here.
Perfect.
Rothfuss here.
And Senator Rothfuss has joined us.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, well, thank you. Appears we have a quorum and we can do business today. First thing I'd like to do is introduce, we have some commissioners with us today, and I would like to have everyone acknowledge that they are here, and I would ask them to get up and introduce themselves and where they're from. Holly, would you begin?
Chairman Pappas.
Is your mic on?
Can you hear me?
I think it's on. I think I can hear you.
Is that on?
Yes.
Okay. Chairman Pappas, we appreciate the hard work you guys do as a committee. I am Holly Dabb from Rock Springs. I'm chairwoman of the School Facilities Commission, and I have been since April. I've been a member of the commission since 2015. Here with us today are 3 other commissioners and then the staff for the School Facilities Commission, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Please.
Laura Anderson, I'm the I'm the Finance and Operations Administrator. Laura Anderson, I'm the Finance and Operations Administrator for the school, the State Construction Department.
Valerie Hughes, School Facilities Division Administrator.
John Rexus, School Facilities Division Construction Management Supervisor.
And Jerry Vincent, Director of the State Construction Department.
Teresa or Terry Livingston, and I'm from New Orleans, like Thermopolis, all the way up to the top of the state. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And I've been on the committee since last year in February, so kind of a newbie.
Mike Gilmore from Casper in Natrona County, and that encompasses also Fremont County. And I've been on the commission. This will be my 7th year.
I'm Jack Darter. I'm from Buffalo, Wyoming. I'm the new kid on the block. I represent Buffalo, Sheridan, and Campbell counties. And I just throw something in here. When I worked for Jim Griffith, who was a state auditor, this is part of our offices. And it's kind of like old home week for me. So yeah. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the work that the commission does. Would you pass the microphone over to Del, please? We also have a former director of the construction department, and Del, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Del McComey, currently working as a consultant for FEA, and good to be back and see the committee and all the folks for the many years that I've worked with you in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you all being here. As I said, you know, the commission is a very important part of this entire process, and we thank you for all the hard work that you do to assist in the facility development of our schools in this state. So with that, let's move on to our agenda items. At this time, we ask the department to please come up and give us their report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and the committee. Jerry Vincent, Director of School Construction Department. We will have the three of us going over items today. We will have Chairwoman Deb coming up and speaking, and we also will have Finance and Operations Administrator Laura Anderson speaking. But today's topics largely rest in the work of the SFD, so Valerie and John will be covering most of the items today. And then, of course, all of us are available for questions. So starting off with the first item on the review of the square footage for facilities, I'd like to turn it over to Administrator Hughes, please.
Thank you.
Chairman Pappas and committee members, enclosed in the packet is a write-up that addresses a question that you had recently regarding the educational buildings pre and post 2001, the gross square footage, the allowable square footage, and the difference between the two of them. Enclosed in your packet is also a table which lines out school by school what those numbers actually are and the delta between them. Included there also is enhancement square footage. If you look through that list, I want to highlight and note that there is 23,856,089 educational gross square feet, and that is net of enhancement square footage. And then there is a total of 16,421,162 educational allowable square feet. And this allowable square feet may shift year over year, and it's just because it's determined by ADM or average daily membership that shifts from year to year. So the delta between those two numbers is 7,434,927 square feet. And that's before the application of the major maintenance calculation as it stands right now. So if we were to apply the 115% to that number, it would roughly be 18,884,336 square feet, and that would leave a difference between actual and allowable of 4,971,753. I'd also like to note that there are only 3 districts across the 48 that are paid on their actual gross square footage versus their allowable square footage. And those 3 districts are Bighorn County School District, 4. Bighorn County School District number 1, Niobrara County School District number 1, Sheridan County School District number 3, and Weston County School District number 7. All other districts across the state are paid on allowable square footage. And I'd also like to note, though, that allowable is not the only, or actual and allowable are not the only thing in that calculation. There is in the calculation, office warehouse spaces also go into that major maintenance calculation. So this is just looking at the educational spaces alone. And roughly, we did a preliminary calculation to and came to a total of, if the state were to start to pay on actual square footage for all districts rather than allowable square footage, where that's happening at 44 of them, it would equate to roughly about $17 million more annually it would need to be paid in major maintenance as of today, and that's if no other factors changed. So at this time, I'll go ahead and stand for any questions.
Committee? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the detailed feedback here. As we look at the lists of square footage, one of the questions I have, as we contemplate this, the purpose of the allowable square footage does make some sense from the standpoint of you don't want to have large unused buildings sit vacant and then we provide major maintenance funding for them. At the same time, we understand that if you are using the building and we want to keep that building up, that they need major maintenance. Are there any glaring examples on the list of things that just wouldn't make any sense to additionally fund? Or is this a fairly clean list of facilities that really should be receiving major maintenance and we've already taken off the inventory, large vacant square footage that might seem to be counter to our interests?
Chairman Pappas, Senator Rothfuss, I believe we would need to actually come back with the excess square footage to go ahead and line up against this data to answer the question effectively. We can certainly put that together and come back to the committee with that.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. I think the key, and this helps us to move in this direction and to inform it, is to be sensible about not just swinging the pendulum too far the other direction, which is what the tendency, I think, of the legislature is, right? We've erred on one side, let's go err on the other side. If we can figure out what we really should be funding, and maybe it isn't that full $17-ish million that's recommended here, maybe 10 of those million make a lot of sense and the other 7 don't. I don't know, I'm speculating here. I think it would be really useful for us to find a method that acknowledges that we're not funding everything that should be funded from a major maintenance standpoint to ensure the integrity of the fleet of schools across the state. And maybe part of that calculation would be to identify and point to facilities that seem wasteful, that seem like they're in our inventory statewide, and maybe they're not worth maintaining, maybe there's alternatives, but we should be exploring kind of a most cost-effective remedy solution to buildings that do fit into that category, which I'm not aware of how many fit into that category, Mr. Chairman. So I think that's a great next step as we continue to contemplate this, if we don't have insight into it now, is to fully understand what we should and shouldn't be funding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I also think that as we all know, our consultants have recommended a higher percentage for funding major maintenance. What I would like to know is if we used that number, how close will it get to, that additional $17 million? Are we very far off if we used that number that our consultants recommended? So,
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss.
I think that's actually substantially higher, if I'm not mistaken, because we're at 2, and we were supposed to be getting to about 2.75 all in. That was taking into consideration the appropriate major maintenance for the surroundings, as well as for that component of security and some of the other things, the enhancement side of it. So the 2.75. So that's a significant increase relative to much more than 17 million.
Well, I guess that's my point. If I knew that number, then if we all knew that number, then perhaps the 17 million would be, we could stomach that.
I'd say it's on the order of 60 million, but we'd have to check.
Whatever. I believe that in light of that, we've all, at least on this committee, most of us have thought about that number having to change. And so maybe this is just a baby step. I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, maybe Matt has that handy.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe last time we looked at it was on a 2.5 replacement factor, and I believe it was around $30 million, but that was the entire gross square footage. It wasn't just the educational square footage, it was applied to both the warehouse and office space as well.
Is that annual? For the
Mr.
30
Chairman, correct.
Yeah, okay, so that's the same as I was remembering.
Okay, thank you. Still a substantial number. Committee, any other? Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Hughes, can you remind me of the 4 districts, the difference in gross square footage versus allowable, paragraph 2 of the letter that you sent to us? I couldn't wrap my head around it for some reason. I know there's good reason going on there, but can you remind me of why we treat those 4 districts differently? Is it simply because they don't have allowable square footage, or just walk me through that real quickly? Thank you.
Ms. Hughes?
Chairman Pappas, Senator Landon. So as it stands right now, statute calls for, in the calculation, for these 4 districts, they, and for all districts actually, the comparison occurs in that it's the lesser of allowable square footage times 115% versus the gross square footage. And so in this case, for those 4 districts, their gross square footage is actually less than their allowable square footage times 115%. You're welcome.
Committee, any other thoughts? Okay. Please continue on.
Second item, Mr. Chair, is referring to Natrona County District and Park, and we'll break this up into 2 parts. I will cover the school for the deaf and that square footage. The question was brought back in our last meeting. You know, what does that lease look like? How does that work? Tell us some more about it. And then the second part, are there any more of these around the state? And so we'll have Valerie talk about that. So what I've included is a variety of documents. There's many more. I didn't want to tip the packet over, but I think it sort of told the story for those that might not be aware of how the school for the deaf came to be. It was actually, we did find a signed copy, but of a MOU, not of a lease, between Natrona 2 and WDE back in the day. We've included some of that in there. And then Natrona 2, this got folded over into Natrona 1. We do have the superintendent of the district here too, in case you have any questions for them. And so basically, if you look at the diagrams, you see the original lease back in the day in 1969. An updated one was referenced and sent over in 2004 to Natrona 1. We still don't have it in a lease. We have a Department of Ed owning a building that doesn't generate any major maintenance. And you have Natrona 1 doing repairs on the school for the deaf, not just in the classrooms or the lunchroom that they would be using, but over time they've actually spent money on the library itself for leaking windows, leaky roof, in addition to a very emergency boiler that went out right around December last year with the temperatures and the kids in the lunchroom. So the district's contention would be that we're spending our major maintenance money on a building that we don't own or lease, and we're not getting compensated for that square footage back from major maintenance dollars. So we lose twice each time we do a repair on that building. If you fold in the complications of the different track maps, the different separations of the who owns what with the city and the county and the district and WDE, and you see that we literally have a hallway that down the middle, part of that, and a lot of you were part of that tour last year. We have a situation where part of the hallway belongs to the district and then a part to this other facility here. So, you know, do we have any others like this in the state? Absolutely not, not of this nature. But we do have on page, what would be 23, would be the color diagram that points to the ownership of each of the 3 major parcels, who they are. One is City of Casper, one is State of Wyoming, which would be the WDE, and then one is actually Natrona. And if you actually looked up on Geo's site who owns the building, it gets even more interesting. It says that it's Game and Fish, because there was a time when Game and Fish had someone in the building, a couple employees, along with a couple WDE employees. WDE employees left at that time. Someone did some sort of check and said, who's in there? And it was Game and Fish. They since have their own facility since that time, and they're not in here anymore. So this is an anomaly in terms of every bit of it, every aspect of it. And yet there's a huge sign out front marquee that says the Department of Education School for the Deaf. So that's kind of the background, how this came together. I know that we discussed in the last meeting, or you discussed among yourselves, what would be the best way to straighten this out, and whether it's a bill, I think Senator Rothfuss brought up, but we stand to, here listening and what you might want to else know about it, or how we might try to rectify the situation. And again, we have the superintendent here if you want to ask any other questions.
Committee questions on the information that was provided? Senator Lander.
Mr. Chairman, with a little bit of latitude, I don't really have a question, but I do want to just back up and say a few things about this facility. Those of us, I'm looking down at Senator Rothfuss, those of us who have been around school facilities for a while have been aware of this situation for a long time. And we have purposefully set it aside. It's like the old house where you say, don't go in that closet. And you can see why. Yeah. Director Vincent did a great job of explaining what we've got there. And so it seems to me like we always had priorities that we felt like deserved to be shoved in front of that facility. We had a lot of work to do out across the state. We have, in many ways, caught up pretty darn well. And so it seems to me, Mr. Chairman, this might be the year that we need to consider drafting something, and I'll leave that up to you. But I'm anxious to get a thought from the department as to what they think the proper fix would be, and maybe our superintendent from that district can help us too. But just a little bit of perspective. This thing's been around for a while. Thank you.
Committee, any other thoughts? Senator Rothfuss.
Well, I guess I agree with Senator Lander. We should take action finally on this and get it cleaned up. And I see two approaches. One would be to work through the budget. The other would be just a very short bill. I actually think the short bill might be the better way to do it. I don't think it would be contentious in any way, but effectively transfer ownership from WDE, which is who it sounds like is currently the owner, and then effectively integrate ownership of it into the school so that it's reflected as being a part of the school is probably the cleanest way to do that, so we don't have an organizational difference in the two. And I'd float that as a concept and see what the rest of the committee and the department thinks about doing it that way. I assume that's just a matter of making that bold statement on behalf of the state.
Okay, that's good. I'd like to hear from the district on that thought as well. Senator Landon, did you have a thought? Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the superintendent makes his way up, I think I agree with Senator Rothfuss. I do think that we might be cognizant of the fact that it's going to take some resources to, you take on that facility, and I think they've been able to put patches on the inner tube, but frankly, we've walked through that facility and it needs a lot of help. So I'm not sure where that lands, but it may have to be included in that bill that not only do we transfer this ownership, but we recognize that there's certain things going on there. So thank you.
Response on that?
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Transferring ownership at a minimum would at least provide generated square footage, major maintenance associated with it. So that's a step in the right direction. But I agree with good senator that that isn't necessarily sufficient, but at least it's better than it is now.
Thank you. Well, let's hear from the district. So, and by the way, thank you so much for the tours that you provided this committee the last time we were up there in June, and it was I think an eye opener for a lot of folks. Thank you. Please.
Chair Pappas, committee, thank you for having me here, and we really enjoyed having you to do the tour around Natrona County for those 3 sites. So when you look at Pineview Elementary School,
For the record, Superintendent Jennings, would you please?
Michael Jennings, Superintendent, Natrona County School District. Left that part off.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming to Natrona. When you look at Pineview Elementary School, it's an older building. Natrona has been incredibly blessed by the work that the state has done on school facilities, and we have some remarkable facilities. Pineview is one of the schools, if you recall, was at 100% design. Those designs are sitting on the shelf, and that building did not proceed with that. We have had conversations with the prior director and Director Vincent regarding the Wyoming School for the Deaf. We do use the building. We use specifically a cafeteria and a few other rooms on this, would be the south side of it. The configuration of the building is quite interesting. It's not necessarily conducive to have full classes in it, and there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done on the building as it exists. So we did a renovation with one of our other schools, which would have been Park Elementary School, and we were seriously looking at doing at Pineview as well. Don't know if we're going to be able to go down that road with enrollment and all of those things, but the facility as far as the School for the Deaf is just a very difficult space, and there would be additional dollars needed to get it where it could be utilized as a school versus the way it sits now. And we have had to use major maintenance dollars to remedy it. So one of the issues when we talked with our board several years ago about, do we want to take the building, that was not a strong interest because the amount of dollars that would have to be put in it to get it up to standards. So Senator Landon, you bring up a good point, is it would take significant dollars right out of the gate to get it to where we needed to get it.
Thank you. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings, for being here today. Really, I guess I follow Senator Rothfuss's line of thinking of, let's get this transferred from WDE to the school district. Because if we want to build a new school on the site, we can't tear down that portion of the school that's WDE because the district doesn't own that. So we would tear down 70% of the building to rebuild on the site, but still have this other chunk sitting there that we couldn't do anything with. So in my mind, it's a baby steps process. And the first thing we have to do is we have to get ownership collective to one entity, whether that be WDE or the school district. We need to get it to collective to one entity. Then we could start to proceed with renovations, demolition, reconstruction, any of that. But while it's currently owned by two different entities, I see a struggle. And so my question is, do you agree that there is a struggle and that in this baby steps process, getting all of it into your hands would then allow us to move to the next stage of either renovation or replacement?
Chairman Pappas, Representative Walters, I totally agree with that. That would be the first step in getting it cleaned up as far as ownership, because we have been working on that for the last, I want to say 4 years, 5 years, at least as long as I've been around. That'd be a step in getting it started and getting down that road. Yes, it would be.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Question. Can you remind us what was, I know there's designs on the shelf. What were those designs again? And we went over this while we were visiting, but what were the plans that are already on the shelf?
And Mr. Chair and Senator Rothfuss, we actually have that coming up in more detail, unless we want to roll to it now.
No, go ahead.
Underneath a further agenda item, Valerie and John are going to go into how, it was another question was how many times have we drawn and put it on a shelf? And then we're going to go into Pineview a bit more background.
We'll wait for that.
Okay.
Sorry, my apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, I know there's also a piece here that's owned by the city, and there's a storage, and I think it was an auditorium or a gymnasium right there. How's that play into this as well? Because I agree that we need one entity here, but is that going to be a hang-up if we're trying to tear things down and have to leave that one part or whatever? So.
Mr. Chair and Senator Cost, the first step is just what Senator Rothfuss and Representative Walters are saying. That is the next step that needs to be addressed with the city. I think we all are knowingly spending major maintenance money when something does happen on that facility in a way that's not in our statute right now. So if we can clean that up and have one owner of this, the type of, you look at page 34, I wanted to include that. It's a very bizarre design and the octagonal type shaped library. And those of you who have toured, all those classrooms are ramped up. you know, and so you couldn't generate enough major maintenance money off this square feet to fix that facility, whether, and it really wouldn't be WDE, it'd be transferred to our state inventory, so it'd be ANI, and whether you gave the major maintenance money to the district or to ANI, it's not going to adequately take care of that facility. But, you know, all those are more questions to be had. And I think the first one is let's be legal, so the next time a boiler goes out, Mike can replace it and not worry about I'm doing something outside of a statute, you know, and at least get some sort of money recouped for that action.
Okay. Well, thank you. We do have WDE here. I'd like to hear from them. I think Shelley, Ms. Hamill, are you able to give us any thoughts from WDE perspective? I want to give you the opportunity to chime in.
Yeah, committee, Mr. Chairman and committee members, Shelley Hamill with the Wyoming Department of Education. I think that it's fair to say that we have followed the progression of trying to understand who's actually responsible for the building and who owns it and such, and we would support a resolution to finalize that and to have that rest where it should.
And you would support the resolution that we transfer everything to the district?
That's certainly your prerogative, Mr. Chairman, and I would say yes, we would. We certainly don't have any funds to maintain that building, and it's kind of an odd situation right now.
Okay. Questions, committee? Okay, well, thank you, Shelley, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone here from the city of Casper by any chance? Probably not.
And Mr. Chair,
They're the third wheel in here.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add that with the transfer of the ownership, I don't think we would change the way that the library is functioning right now for the School for the Deaf. And there still are two, I believe, employees, WDE employees that we met that day that work in that building. But, you know, this is strictly in order to be able to do any kind of maintenance on this building is why we're doing this. We're not trying to fix everything. So I like the way it was presented and the way it was seconded. That's what we're just trying to do. We don't want to knowingly work outside of a statute any longer than we have to. So thank you.
Okay. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just for clarification, Director Vincent, any hurdles in the way? I just want to be careful as to how we request this bill be drafted. And I'm looking at you and Mr. Rexis both. You mentioned the Game and Fish has been involved there. What else can you tell me about the title of that place and where it came from? Is there any concerns that we have? Let's just make sure we get this thing drafted correctly. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, Mr. Chair and Senator Landon. To me, you could go two different ways with a bill on this. It's in order to address the maintenance of the building, or if you're trying to do a real property transfer, or we have to get appraisals, what is it worth? What's the dollar amount? How does all that come over? So it kind of, you step back in order to go forward again and say, what is it we're trying to do for a step one? And then is that a bill to do the major maintenance transfer? Two, is it a real property building transfer? So I think those would be the questions before you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the director reminding us of things like appraisals and, you know, I wouldn't have gone there in my head yet this morning, but there we are. So I think there's several little things we're going to have to watch out for in this bill. So.
Senator Rothfuss?
I'm not entirely sure, and this would be something we'd have to look into. If we're doing an internal government-to-government transfer, I'm not sure that we need an appraisal. I think we can just make a declaration of ownership shift as long as it is staying effectively. It's from state books to state books. I would expect us to be able to do that without having to get appraisal. But we definitely want staff to check into that as drafted.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. Any other comments? Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, just to add to that, I think we know what we're getting there. It's almost like, hey, we've done you a favor, school district. Look what we're giving you. Congratulations. No, it's well put. Thanks.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we have a formal bill on the proposal motion yet, But I think we should add to it that the department also negotiate with the city of Casper to clean up the small portion of that auditorium that is on city of Casper property and say, and I would think the city of Casper would be happy to give that to the district. And that way the school's footprint is all owned by the school instead of having this other little odd nook and cranny that is not. But I think part of this negotiation needs to be basically get it all to one ownership. Away from the WDE, away from the city of Casper. And I don't think that includes all the grassy area and all the stuff that the city of Casper owns. It's just the small square footage that is actual building and maybe get a 10 or 15, 20-foot area around the edge of that building that from the city of Casper. So I think that all needs included.
Mr. Chairman, on that point.
Senator Rothfuss.
You know, while we're contemplating it though, would we want, if we're thinking about the future, the long-term future of that particular parcel, it almost seems like we want to purchase anything the city owns as part of the ownership. We have internal funds for that, so we don't necessarily need it in the legislation, but it would be a consideration. Do we want that in the legislation, a specific possibility of appropriation for it, or just leave that up to the discussion? I certainly agree with Representative Walters, though, that we definitely need the spot under the footprint.
Right. And Mr. Chair, that's why I brought up if they're to consider if there's any kind of real property or land type appraisal need to be done, because we're not straight state to state on this. There's a piece of the city involved, as you brought up. And then if you looked at the layout of the new Pineview School back in the day, it's on the other side of the campus. And this all was integral to bringing playfield back for everyone. Now, you know, in my past, cities and districts have joint use ventures on fields and all that. So maybe you don't have to dial it in on a deed and on a sale or what have you. But just wanted you to know that the city brings in a third component to it. So it's not just us to us. So that's why I mentioned that.
Okay.
Follow up, I think
Representative Walters.
in the bill, Mr. Chairman, I think in the bill, it's just simply clean it up from WDE and the small portion the city owns of that land that the building sits on. And that's keep it clean, keep it simple, get that trued up. Then if we want to have in other legislation or in the school facilities planning bill or any other place to acquire more of the property from the city of Casper, I think that would be the appropriate mechanism for that additional square footage. But I think it's just a matter of let's clean up the physical building, who owns it, and get it to one owner in this piece of legislation.
Sounds good.
Okay. Before we decide what we're going to do, I know we don't, we were going to wait for public comment at the end of all these reports, all these updates. But on this particular subject, I'd like to take any public comment. If anybody out there has anything that they want to put forward on this subject, I'd be glad to listen to you. Apparently not. How about anybody online got their hand up? No? Okay. So I'll close that little piece of public comment. Committee, what would, any other comments, or what would you like us to do on this?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I'll let Senator
Rothfuss
take the lead.
I just moved to have legislation drafted to transfer ownership of the state-owned portion to the, I guess, appropriate entity that owns the school, as well as provide direction to work with the city of Casper to acquire that portion of ownership of the footprint of the school. And that would be the extent of the bill draft.
And I got a second over there from Senator Landon. Committee, any discussion on the bill?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, I think that would be a more than adequate bill draft to get us started. I think we've kind of bounced around on where I knew some of the issues might go. When we toured that facility not long ago, there's some serious issues there. So I think we can understand why that building rose to a level of planning and design a few years ago, and it was shelved like several of those buildings were that So we've got work to do there, but I think this is a great first step. And I think we've covered, hopefully, Daniel, we've covered the issues that are there, so.
Yeah, I was going to ask staff, anything we've missed? Are you okay
Mr.
with-
Chairman, the only question I would have is, I'm not sure the state can direct Natrona or the city of Casper to sell the land to Natrona County School District number 1.
Negotiate.
So I'll have to do a little bit more research on that and
And-
certainly include a staff comment in the event there's an issue.
Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and that was why I phrased, engage with the city of Casper to acquire, because that's, I think, the extent of what we can do. I can't imagine they won't go along with this, but yeah, we can't direct Casper, so directing the school facilities department, working with the school district to engage with the city of Casper and negotiate acquisition of, it doesn't even have to be purchased, just negotiate acquisition of, something along those lines. I don't think we can direct them. Yeah, that'd be very popular. This is a good idea. All right. Sounds like we're going, no.
Okay, so any other thoughts on that? Okay, committee, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll have that bill draft prepared for our next meeting. Okay, let's move on to the next update.
Mr. Chair, and we'll have, if we can return Pineview and Park, we're sort of rolled in to the same agenda item. So we can return to page 11 of the agenda, and then Valerie can speak to if we've seen any other type of anomalies of leases throughout the state, and then roll into the next item.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, in regards to Park was another one of the schools that we toured up in Natrona County at the last committee meeting, and some questions arose due to a 4-classroom addition that was going on at that facility. And so in this summary, I just wanted to point out that there is 28,654 gross square feet for the elementary school, whereas the allowable square footage is 50,949 square feet. And then the district as a whole has roughly about 365,339 square feet of excess educational space. And then additionally, on this summary sheet, I've included what the major maintenance allocations were, the most recent ones, the end-year balance for the district. And that total ending balance as of June 30, 2022 is $10,376,680. The district does still have roughly, they have $4,400,112 that can be used towards enhancement square footage. Per statute, that's the 10% that they have accumulated and still have available. And then I did note as of the print of this packet that we hadn't received the information for the enhanced square footage. We do have that now. The district did provide that to us. So that 4-classroom addition plus a vestibule addition is roughly 5,526 square feet that was added. And that was for a total cost of roughly about 1.9 million in total final cost with design and construction. And that was paid for by the district. And so for that, I'll go ahead and stand for any questions that you may have.
Committee? Questions? Okay. Apparently you have no takers on your questions. Thank
I'm
you.
not sure if it's a request, but we would like to roll back construction and design costs to that period, please.
I suppose, does the district want to make any comment on that particular report?
They do not.
Oh, he's not. He said no, okay. Yes, Senator Landon?
So this might be for Mr. Rexis or Director Vincent, Ms. Hughes. out of those design papers, Mr. Chairman, you can weigh in on this too. Can we use any of that? I mean, when we worked 5, 6 years ago and put that on the shelf, what's involved with, I mean, do you really kind of have to start all over to? And I suppose, you know, what we're doing with the deaf school, probably that property being folded in changes things anyway, but are you able to salvage anything, Mr. Rexis?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I think the answer to that question is probably project specific. There's a few different moving parts there. If the design firm is no longer in business that did the original design, getting another firm to come in and do that review and take ownership could be costly. If that design firm is still in business, perhaps a negotiation could take place for them to come back in and do a code review on it and update the drawings. But I think everything would be dependent upon what the current educational philosophy of that district is and what their programming looks like. Things have a tendency to change from time to time. We see different administrations and different expectations in regards to how that basket of goods is delivered. And so it would have to be something that the school district was in agreement with, that was still a functional design and would still meet their needs. But I think there's certainly some advantage to having those documents. I think worst case scenario, you still have at the very least a conceptual plan. Maybe some of the spaces might need to change. Some of the adjacencies within the building might need to change in order to meet some of the programming. Certainly some of the codes, as I mentioned earlier, would need to be revised, but you still would have a head start. I just don't know that, you know, if the district was still willing to use that design and it was still functional for them, and if the architectural firm was still in business, then probably there would be a lot of economy there to reusing those plans, but there's a lot of factors that have to align in order to realize that.
Right. Frankly, and just for my input, frankly, it's been my experience that number one, education, the delivery of education changes very rapidly. And there's what was designed 5 or 6 years ago, as far as delivery of education, as he mentioned, the philosophy has changed. Certainly, the delivery of education is important aspect that affects facility design, and school boards and administrations, they change as well, and they have different ways of how they view the delivery of education. And so I've had it where in 2-3 years, there's been a complete change of thinking on a facility. Certainly when I did Cary Junior High, it was the second time we put it out, and there was a vast difference from the first request for qualifications to the second one. Education thinking changed. Second of all, the firm that was selected may be in business, but certainly a lot of their consultants may be different, and that plays a big role in it, especially if they've got a planner, an education planner. Normally, most architects in this state will hire someone that has been in education, that does these things full-time around the country. So those people may have changed, even if the original firm hasn't changed. And as it was mentioned, codes have changed. I know that right now, and So whatever documents were delivered, unless they were just conceptual, certainly are no longer any good. They will have to completely be redone. I would imagine as well, being that long on the shelf, that there might not even be a contract with the entity that designed it. Typically, they time out after a while and the contracts are closed, which would mean that they couldn't just open another contract with that same firm. They'd have to go out for another request for qualification. Just my thoughts.
Mr. Chair, Senator Landon, the 3 architect firms that I worked for, we didn't want to take over someone else's drawings and or their engineers, whether we had a relationship with them prior or not. You know, probably the most salvageable part of the plan is, because it was at 100% design, is knowing civil engineering and drainage and locating all the power, water, sewer, and where it's at and what depth throughout the site. That hasn't changed. And then any city requirements and working with them on, you know, where electrical service drop might occur and all those kind of things. That's still there. That shouldn't have changed much, but possible. But it would be, even if the classroom still worked for the district and we're just going to take more casework out because we're doing open floor plan or vice versa, I would tend to agree with Senator Pappas. It's going to be tough to resurrect those drawings. And when you look at it, plus if there is any program changes, like what John mentioned, you're going to look at that delta on what new design is versus the other design and bringing it up, and it's just going to be better to go forward. I would agree with Senator Pappas.
So, Mr. Chairman, I suspected as much, and I thought that it would probably be pretty marginal, and that's the shame of it, you know, that to make that kind of investment and have to put it on the shelf is just, that's just the way it happened, and the way, you know, I think that's something we needed to do, but it definitely costs you, doesn't it? So,
Well, you've probably, at least those folks in the Senate have probably heard me harp on this, that even 1 year's delay is really detrimental to our projects. That's why I'm in favor of a single contract that goes from level 1, level 2, level 3. Let's not appropriate money in two spots, because when you do level 1, level 2, then we, the legislature, have the ability to come in and say, oh, we're not going to fund level 3 for another year or two. That creates all sorts of havoc. So I've been the proponent of creating a system where we're going to build a school. Let's get it all done and make one single appropriation, design, construction, everything. Okay.
And Mr. Chair, to me, the worst that could have happened back in the day is with the ADM drop, is you would have got a school built at those dollars instead of today's dollars. It would have been at, say, 45% capacity. And either no other school comes, they're gonna have to balance enrollment through that, you know, until growth occurred, or at 60% capacity. And it would have taken care of their needs for quite a while, you know, and they would have figured out how to do grade level reconfiguration and how they're gonna make that work. So I think the single phase could have kept that from happening. Fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot where the step between first step and second step costs us an ADM and a project gets shelved, but it absolutely affects the construction costs and things of that nature. So I would agree with you.
Okay. Committee, any other thoughts? Okay. I think we're on to the next item.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, another request was in regards to the security appropriations for K-12 school facilities. There was $9 million appropriated in 2015 and an additional $4.95 million in 2019 for an aggregate amount of $13.95 million that was appropriated. There was a list of appropriate or allowable uses, I should say, that was the top 20. Sorry, I'm on page 40, if that helps everyone. Um, Page 40.
40,
We jumped a little bit there. There we go.
yeah, 40. Which is page 53 if you're using the PDF.
Oh, sorry. So there was roughly a list of about 20 allowable uses for that appropriation district by district. And there was an assessment that was done that identified for each district where there were some issues. And so of those funds, there's roughly 2.9 million that is still sitting out there that can be applied to new projects. There are some projects that they still haven't necessarily been completed or fully expensed, but the funds are earmarked for particular projects in that case. But overall, on the right-hand column that says available for new projects, the total at the bottom, in your packet, it's $2,918,755.70. That's gone down just between the printing and today by about $9,000 that a district has now allocated towards a particular project. But that still leaves 2.9 million that can be used towards security projects. There's only a small handful of districts that have expended or allocated in full what their portion was of that. We did internally, our project managers, and this is an ongoing active effort, but earlier this year, they kind of dug in and really reached out to their districts, or they attempted to go ahead and encourage the use of these $2.9 million that are sitting out there, to go ahead and make sure that districts remember that it's there and that it can be used towards certain things. And that effort resulted in roughly about $752,000 that in collaboration between the department and the districts, that they were able to kind of clean up old projects that were sitting out there and put it back into the bucket so it can be redeployed by that particular district. And for that, I'll go ahead and stand any questions.
In some of these line items that are attached to each the available balance for each district, are there some districts that have said that they've finished them all and that number is no longer available or no longer needed that we could use for other projects? Or are there districts that are saying that they've done everything they need and there's still money on their line item?
Mr. Chairman, we have received some feedback from some districts that the list that's here is a little too restrictive for the use of funds, so they may have other security items that they want to address, but the way that it was written and the way that it was appropriated, it wouldn't be necessarily allowable. So we have heard that from some districts. I haven't necessarily heard that we've finished everything and we don't need the rest of this money.
Okay, and the there aren't any districts, at least when we discussed it in Casper, when we met with the district there, that the issue with spending it all was doing projects at a time. They had to queue them up and it just took time to get to them. And I think they had a couple more projects that they had to get to before they, I think we were talking about vestibules at the time. Is that true at a lot of the districts? First of all, is the reason why we have balances here is part of the reason is that they just haven't got to the projects yet? Or are there other circumstances that are keeping them from executing these projects?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that if you're looking at the far right column, the available for new projects, those are funds that districts essentially haven't said, I want to use them for this project and earmarked it. Otherwise, we would have it in our record and it would fall more so in the allocated to projects column or the total DALD or director authorization letter that's required to go ahead and set aside those funds or encumber those funds for a particular project. So I would say, I would agree with you and say that I do believe that there was some kind of phasing here of projects to allow for things to get completed. But I would say that there's certainly money that's out there that we are not aware that districts have something in mind for.
So the allocated to projects column, that's both completed and projects that are scheduled to be done. Is that correct?
That would, Mr. Chairman, that would be a combined of what has been, yes, allocated to projects and also completed projects.
Okay.
So it would be the total of the DALD and the total of the expense. So collectively, what projects, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
My question's at the other end of the spectrum where you've got, for example, Niobrara 1, Sheridan 1, Weston 1, that have spent $0 and allocated $0. Do we have a sense of why they've done nothing with these funds? And again, it doesn't look like anything is planned for. Otherwise, I would expect that to be showing up in one of the columns.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I do not have that information with me at this time, but I can certainly get that together with our staff and circle back with it.
That'd be great, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to check in with each of those districts and find out why they're not using these funds. Thank you.
Yeah, appears to be about 7 of them. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Hughes, is there a process that if we've got a district that has an important project but doesn't have the resources left to do it, is there a process by which we could transfer some of these funds out of Sheridan 1, for example, if they're not going to use anything? Can we direct it to a project somewhere else in the state where we need it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, at this time, we do not have the authority to do that with these funds, to shift between the districts. As it was written and as it stands, whatever is allocated to each district is for them individually versus one big pot that all of the districts can share in.
Okay, thank you.
And that was to my point, whether if they don't need them, all the monies, why are we leaving it in that line item? Certainly, staff, do you have any thoughts on this?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe these appropriations were made at a district-specific level. They were an amount appropriated for security projects. And so the allocations, my understanding, have been delegated by the department. The legislature never appropriated these on a district-by-district basis. So we can go back and review the language that was provided in the session law and provide a more succinct answer, more detailed answer. But my gut tells me these are in a total amount appropriated to the department. And I will, on the authority to move the funds around across districts, we'll review this during the break and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to do that. If it's indeed that way, then certainly we can.
Mr. Chairman.
We can try and move those dollars around if we need to.
Mr. Chairman, we'd certainly be happy if somebody finds something different on that that allows for use. But what generated the appropriations was actually the assessment for particular items at each of the districts. And that then generated the total amount for each district. And the money was appropriated to each of those districts specifically for those items to work on and correct. So it was, the way that it's written, it stems from what that assessment did district by district, is our understanding. So if there is something that it's not as stringent and we do have the latitude to go ahead and modify that, we certainly will work with districts to do that and are happy to do that, but that's our understanding.
Okay. Well, I'd ask Matt if you would do that research before the next committee meeting and bring us your thoughts back. And if we need to take some action, we will. Okay. Committee, any other thoughts on this item? Senator Landon?
Just a final thought or two. I appreciate the report. Just given the times and given things elsewhere, you know, it's good for us to take a look at this every chance we get. Just make sure that that we're eyeballing things. We can't do anything about a rock put in a back door somewhere, but I'm really proud of the efforts of this committee and of the legislature in general on the security front. I think we've gained a lot of ground in Wyoming, and I think we need to stay diligent. So glad we're looking at it, and maybe we can revisit in November and find out if there's something we need to do to transfer some money or something. So.
We certainly can actually do things about a rock putting in the back door. There's electronic hardware in our, and we've been putting them in new schools where there's a door position detector and a latch position detector that will tell you whether the door is closed and if it's locked. So there is that. It probably gets pretty expensive to retrofit all our schools, but certainly all our new schools need to be, those things need to be identified and put in if we're really serious about security.
Mr. Chair, just one more thing to consider. Last spring, I spoke to some districts, so this list doesn't always appear the way it is. Like we're fine, we don't need anything else that Valerie's talked about. Some of them had an issue with what they wanted to do. There wasn't enough money in the security to do, so they'd have to take out of their major maintenance or to make that project whole, and they did not have the funds to take from major maintenance with their other needs in which to do it. So it doesn't just, if you see a 0 in that column, it doesn't speak that we're all good. It's not just what Valerie's saying. It wasn't enough to do what we wanted to do, and we didn't have enough available to make it up and to meet it, so.
Well, we probably should, we probably should find out if that's the case. Certainly, I don't know, I guess it was probably when we did this, I'm not sure I was on this committee at the time. So those of you who were, was there a survey done? How did we come up with the original appropriation for how much was needed? Can someone shed some light on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and staff will probably need to interject a little bit as I skip a few things, but there was a review done of safety and security issues around the state. Came back with a large list of various ideas statewide. Some of those are listed here on page 40. Millions and millions of dollars, and we knew we couldn't eat that elephant all at one time. And so what the legislature did at that time was picked about 7 or 9 items off the list and then appropriated a set dollar value and said, of this amount of money, you can do these types of security upgrades and retrofits to your school. And then a few years later, we saw that we had only spent, and at the time, I think we appropriated $10 million or something in that neighborhood. We saw that we had not spent much of it, so then we opened the list up to a few more items, but still, I don't believe it was the entire list of items that we had noticed. And at that time, then more districts applied to do some of the expanded list of activities. I think Director Vincent really hit the nail on the head in that in a lot of these that you'll see are in smaller districts in which they couldn't generate enough money out of this formula to do the project that was needed, and they didn't have enough internal funds to make up the difference. And so they just walked away from it completely. In some cases, they were hoping for new schools or had larger projects going on in the near future, and so they chose to go with their larger project and not worry about the security aspect singularly. So I think there's a whole combination of things that were going on, but it was studied, came back with a large price tag. We picked a few items off the list and set a dollar value and said, go out and do what you can. And that's really where we are today. And to my knowledge, and Matt would probably have the updated number, but of our total appropriations that we've put towards safety and security, I don't think we have spent all of that to date, and that's why 2 years ago we did not request more safety and security funding, because what was there had not been spent, and probably partially due to the list, because we had specific items you had to do and whatnot. So that's the history I recall, and would hope others can fill in the blanks.
I guess that's a concern of mine, that we had certain items on there and we figured 10 or $9 or $10 million would cover it. But if we've got 7 districts out there that say that there's not enough money to cover it, and they're not providing the security for our students in those districts, that's troubling to me. We need to reassess maybe those particular projects and see whether we need to either divert funding from these other schools that are not using it or appropriate more. But security is important.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make it clear, I would say that all of these schools are providing excellent security for their students. I don't want anyone out there to think that these schools don't have excellent security for their students, because they all have excellent security for their students. It's really a matter of, did the consultant like the door locks that we were using, or did they think it should be an electronic door lock that could be controlled from a central point? It's really, that's why I say they're all very secure. It's more of a, what does the consultant think is absolute perfect in a utopian world to what is reality out in the state of Wyoming. And so I feel like our schools are very secure. I believe they're very secure. I think the districts would all say their schools are very secure. There is always more that can be done, but I don't want anyone to think that we are ripe for problems.
Thank you. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the former chairman catching us up and reminding us, where we've been on the security funding. I think primarily where we are at today is having, we appropriated block grants, basically, and we were able to work our way through 6 or 7 or 8 different categories of a rubric that was provided many years ago. And the representative, I think, described it well. We've made it a long ways down that list. Some of these things, there is a very good possibility that a district out there might be waiting to garner more funds to put in a communication system or some such. But I think it's good for us to find that out and just make sure that we're providing the resources out there that might be needed. I think we've really come a long way, and our districts have done a great job on this front. So,
okay, committee, any final thoughts? Matt, anything?
Mr. Chairman, just to give you a summary of the appropriations, in 2014, there was an initial $9 million appropriated. It was conditioned upon further approval by the legislature. In 2015, it was appropriated under certain conditions. Then in 2019, the balance at that point remaining was about $6.5 million, which was reappropriated along with an additional $4.9 million appropriation, kind of the balance of what was already expended, close to about that. And that was that reappropriation and the new appropriation were had different conditions than the original 2014 and 2015 appropriation, which allowed the commission to approve the projects. We can delve in this a little bit in more detail at the next meeting if you like, but that's kind of a quick summary of what the $13.95 million appropriations are at.
Okay, thank you. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, a question. So Matt, somewhere in there, we recommended, and I think the legislature approved it, the ability to use 10% of your major maintenance funding. Is that correct? And
yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Landon, good recollection on that. The prior 3 biennia, 2017-18, 2019-20, and 21-22, the legislature authorized, in addition to the $13.95 million in security funding, up to 10% of a school district's major maintenance allocation to be expended upon security projects. That footnote was associated with Agency 27 within the budget bill for the past 3 biennial, that was not contained in the current biennial budget. And Mr. Chairman, if you're thinking about how much that equates to, or the, past 6 years, it was approximately 42 million could have been allocated to those types of projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
So, Senator Rothfuss.
So that's the sort of total aggregation. I don't think we've seen how much was spent on that, though. At least I don't remember seeing how much of the 10% allowance was spent on that over the years, and that would give us a little bit of insight into whether there's still demand out there or not.
Probably that data hasn't been requested by anyone. Maybe we should request that from the districts.
Do we know, Ms. Hughes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we do actually track that in our AIM database, and each district has access to see that individually, what they still have left that they can use towards their security. We can certainly put that together for all districts as a collective total and get back to you with that as well.
It would be useful just to, on a year-by-year basis, just so that we understand kind of what the demand on those funds was. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think we'd like to see that at the next meeting. Also, at the next meeting, I'd like to see the just a report on each of those 7 districts that have not used the money. Just if you'd contact them and see what their thoughts are, and whether it's because they're looking for projects larger than their funding, or what the reason is. Okay, committee, any other discussion on this topic? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to expenditures of federal funds on K-12 school capital construction and maintenance.
Okay. Mr. Chair, we'll have Valerie start this off, and I'm going to step aside so Shelley can come on up from Department of Ed.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, this is an update from the last meeting. There's been a total of 76 requests that have come in from districts in the aggregate amount of $28.9 million. And those requests have collectively come from 29 of the 48 school districts, and a total of roughly about 1.3 million has been distributed to the districts thus far. What I also included, and I believe Representative Walters, you requested this at the last meeting, on page 44 of the printed copy of the booklet, it actually separates out for the projects that were submitted, which portion we actually had noted on facility plans from the 2021 facility plan process, and which portion was not included on a facility plan in working through that process with the district. So roughly about 10.77% of the projects that have been submitted were included on the facility plans. And I'll go ahead and pass to Ms. Hamill.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, committee member Shelley Hamill, the WDE. I would just add to that my colleague Valerie has shared. I appreciate the collaboration between our 2 agencies. I would just add that some of the projects that are submitted through this process are not necessarily construction projects as they're defined and approved for this committee. There are some that there's a requirement that anything that is over $5,000 receive a pre-approval. And we do have some of those types of requests that are also ushering through the same system. So just wanted you to be aware of that.
Senator Landon?
Just a quick question. Was that a pretty good range out across our 40-plus districts? The request for this funding, over 70 projects, what was the representation? How many districts did that represent? Just a ballpark.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Landon, that represents 29 different districts.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 28.9 million requested. One project has been denied. Doesn't matter which one that is, but only 1.3 of this has been expended. So what's the timeline for these other districts to expect to receive their funds? and be able to start working on these projects. I guess that's really the next step forward is what I'm trying to figure out here.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, that's a great question. The federal funds always work on a reimbursement type process. So the 1.3 that's been reimbursed doesn't necessarily just represent one project or two projects. It's pieces of projects. So as school districts expend on their projects and submit for reimbursement, they receive that reimbursement quickly. So we would anticipate seeing that uptick pretty quickly. The funds need to be obligated by July 30th of 2023 and fully expended in 2024. So that when you look at the life of a construction project, as you know, it takes a little bit of time. But we anticipate seeing a slowdown in construction requests through this process and an uptick in the reimbursement request.
Follow-up. Just a quick follow-up, and you said they're reimbursed quickly, so if they submit today, is it 30 days, 60 days, 15 days, roughly, or typically, and I would recognize that it's probably not always consistent, but what would a district typically expect a reimbursement to come in?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, we usually strive to have a 30 to 45-day turnaround at the long end.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the history of appropriations for design without construction funds. I believe Director will.
Mr. Chair, we continue on with Valerie and John on this topic.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, at the last select committee meeting, we discussed some of the projects that we knew of that had design without construction appropriations. And so you asked us to give you a little bit of a history and follow up with the projects that had that occur. And what I found was that we had a total of 5 projects that had received design funding without a construction appropriation. The first project on the list is the transportation building for Campbell County School District Number 1. That appropriation came as part of an ancillary appropriation in the 2014 budget session. And the total amount of that share was $451,400. That project's still ongoing. To date, I think where we're at is they're pretty close to, if not having already fixed the site. They've expended some of those funds in the amount of $103,951.74 for due diligence on the property. And like I said, now they're ready to move forward. The remaining balance of $347,448.26 we feel might be a little bit short for a complete design of that facility based on the requirements that were driven by the size of the school district, as well as the programming that was driven and our guidelines for that type of facility. We're looking at about a 30,000 square foot building to house their transportation administration, dispatch, support offices, in addition to the wash bays and repair bays, and a substantial amount of parking lot for the buses and support vehicles. So we feel like that's going to be
Can I ask a question on that? There was actually some physical site work done?
There has not been physical site work done other than due diligence, such as geotechnical work and and surveys, that type of thing to identify. So knowing where we're at, the discussion that occurred between the school district and I believe their associate superintendent's here today as well. If you have some questions regarding their project, he probably is more familiar with all the intricacies than I am. But essentially where we're at is we're going out with an RFP for what we would consider a level 2 study for conceptual design and cost estimate on that site, with an alternate for a cost for complete design, just to see how close we would be and how feasible it is for us to complete that design. But worst case scenario, what we should get out of that is a better understanding of what the costs are going to be for design and construction of that facility, and a conceptual design to move forward with.
Since this was appropriated in 2014, was the amount adequate enough? Because I'm assuming the design came much later.
Chairman Pappas, I think that it was appropriated in the 14 budget session for the 15-16 biennial budget. And I haven't been able to find a budget sheet for that project specifically. It was part of a bucket of funds that were appropriated for ancillary projects. I do know that at the time, I don't believe the site was yet fixed, and the district's been performing diligence in order to acquire that site, and I think they're ready to move forward now. But I can't find anything specific about, you know, what we anticipated in regards to the size of that building being. I know that some of that expenditure was to drive out the programming and determine what our adequacy standards and guidelines allow for that type of facility. So I think that's where they're at now. They've got their program established and they're ready to move forward, and that's why we're proceeding in the way we are, to get the best information that we can get and to see if it's even feasible for us to complete the design with the funds available. With that, before I move on to our other findings, I certainly could open it up to questions, and Associate Superintendent Dennis Holmes is here if you have a question for him.
Yes, I see. Seems like he's got a comment to share with us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Dennis Holmes, Associate Superintendent for Instructional Support, Campbell County. Mr. Rexis did a fine job explaining our situation. We have 172 buses in our fleet. We currently park as many buses as we can on our site, which is 1 1/2 acre. We have 3 bays, 1 wash bay, and I think it's pretty easy to understand that 170 buses do not fit on 1.5 acres, so we park them on many different sites as necessary. We've been working hard to acquire some property, and we've done so. We haven't finalized, but it's a trade with Campbell County. We've traded an existing piece of property for another piece of property on Warlow. It's about 15 acres. We've completed the due diligence. We're just waiting in conjunction with the SFC to work with the county to finalize that exchange. So other than the due diligence, there's no cost to the state. And then it would be our hope to continue on first to secure funding, and then whether it's a level 2 design or something further than that, our hope would be to go ahead and create a facility that is suitable for 170 buses, plus our other fleet that we have, which is about another 60 vehicles. So that's where we're at, and certainly be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. John,
Mr. Chairman,
continue on?
the second appropriation that we received for design but not construction has been a pretty hot topic already today, and that's Pineview Elementary School in Natrona County School District 1, the one we toured in Casper, Wyoming. That appropriation came in the 2012 budget session, which would have been the 13-14 biennial session. And it was for design in the amount of $1,193,357. We have completed 100% design documents on that project. And to date, we've expended $676,215.84. I believe the remaining balance of that money has been swept back and returned.
When was that design completed?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me what date that design was completed?
I would have to look a little bit, Mr. Chairman, but I do have that information. I suspect it was right around 2016, but I can verify that and get back to you with that information.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss.
So, my apologies, can you repeat the figure that was actually expended of that 1.2 million?
$676,215.84.
Okay, so we effectively spent $670,000 that was flat out wasted. I mean, totally burned, and I don't think we can use, I would guess, any of those plans at this point in time after 6 years. I'd assume it's a reboot. Okay, thank you.
You're probably correct.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to say that the design firm that did design those drawings and that building is still in business. It's a local design firm. They actually also designed the Thyra Thompson building there in Casper and did quite well on that too. So if this may be one of those buildings that if the functionality still meets the district's requirements, that it would be quite possible for us to look at that and just see. It would require a negotiation to determine what the cost might be to blow the dust off that.
That's great. All right, maybe it's not.
So if indeed it can be resurrected and modified, it seems like there's plenty of fee to do that, so left.
Mr. Chairman, I just got handed a note to our last
reverted
expenditure
already?
on that project was in 2015.
So has the money reverted?
Yeah, that's what he said.
Oh, okay, I
There's
missed
zero
that.
budget.
I missed that. Thank you.
Maybe not a waste.
So, Mr. Chairman, the remaining balance of those funds was reverted in October of 2020.
Thank you.
The other thing that I'd like to note is I did take a look at this in regards to the justification for not making an additional funding request for the construction. And I think this one in particular was a little more complicated than the remaining three schools that we're about to talk about, in that the enrollment didn't take a drastic decline. It stayed fairly steady. I suspect that, and this is a little bit speculative on my part, but I suspect that what happened is that during the course of this design, we had approximately 4 additional new schools that were sized appropriately for projected enrollment receive occupancy and come online, that affected what the capacity for the district was, that reduced the need. Even though the enrollment didn't necessarily drop, their capacity increased, if that makes sense. So I believe that's most likely what happened in this instance. The third and fourth schools were in Park County School District 6, which is Cody, Wyoming. And there were some anomalies occurring with their population growth there at the time of the appropriation, which was given in the 2014 budget session. And so we did a most cost-effective remedy study on these two schools, and it drove out an addition to two different schools, and one also had a remodel associated with it as well. The addition was to Sunset Elementary School, which was a fairly new school, and then we also had an addition / remodel at Glenn Livingston Elementary School. The appropriation for the Glenn Livingston Elementary School was a total of $741,623. And the total amount of expenditures on that project were $219,055.11. And that school, along with the other remaining schools on the list, also were designed to 100% design and ready for bid. I think at the time, and this was one of my regions and one of my projects, when we determined that enrollment had drastically fallen off and it eliminated them from consideration for the construction appropriation, we were so close to being complete. There was a very minimal amount of money left on the table. I want to say we were at 95% design, and there was only around $5,000 left in the design contract to take those across the finish line, that we felt like it would be more appropriate if we were going to shelve the plans to spend that $5,000 and take them 100% of the way, just in case there was another turn in enrollment and we needed to effectively use those designs to relieve a capacity issue. So a substantial amount of that money was swept back as well. And on the Sunset Elementary School project, the total appropriation for design was $282,909, of which we spent $145,975.18. Both of those projects were designed by the same architectural firm, which also happens to still be in business, but I don't believe that, based on what I was seeing in the enrollment projections and the trailing data, we're anywhere near having some sort of capacity issue in that district. The final project is the Uri Elementary School addition in Uinta County School District 6. That appropriation came in the 2014 budget session as well. It was for a total of $308,778, of which we spent $102,946.94. That project was also designed to 100% and ready for bid. And with that, I'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, John. Committee, any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss?
On the Uinta 6, any concerns about recent population growth there, or is that relatively stable? I don't recall any population pressure there, but.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, if you'll give me just a moment.
No worries.
I do have the most current enrollment projections.
Oh, great, thanks.
For that, so. A little bit of an eye test here. I don't have this up in the Excel spreadsheet, so we can do the math here quickly. Valerie's got it up, but that is a K-5. And for 2020, we're looking at how many students? 304 students. If we were to go 8 years out to 2030, we're projecting out 206. So based on our enrollment projections, there's a declining enrollment. And that enrollment has declined since the design appropriation, where it was trending upwards prior to that appropriation.
Thank you.
Senator Landon, did you have a question?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just a thought before we leave. These are all capacity type projects, and driving down, I thought about yesterday's conversation about charter schools, which I think is on the minds of a lot of folks out across the state. There's some push going on there. And I just throw that out for awareness that if those wishes are met, for example, and we get several more charter schools, it's going to affect school facilities. And so I don't have much to say beyond that, other than I'm sure that our commission, our director and his staff are going to have to be aware of what's that going to do with our considerations for modifications to schools out across there. I'm going to be a little more reluctant to expand schools if it's the same district that is going in a different direction. So anyway, I thought this might be an appropriate spot, Mr. Chairman, to throw that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Committee, any thoughts or questions on these 5 schools or this topic?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss.
First of all, I appreciate all the work. We asked for this information so we could understand if there's anything that we're missing that got swept under the rug over the years. And it was largely motivated by our discussion of Pineview at the last meeting. And it's honestly quite good to know that we don't have a half dozen other ones sitting out there that we weren't aware of. To me, it really looks like we need to finally resolve Pineview. That's got to be one of our key priorities, and I think that should probably be one of our highest priorities, is to work with Pineview as a committee now that we've solved a lot of the problems of the past. But by the sound of it, the 2 Park 6 and the Uinta 6 circumstances, there's no point in moving forward with a remedy. Those have resolved. They were popular or capacity based and are resolved. And it also sounds like the transportation circumstance in Campbell 1 is moving on a path that's a rational path as they explore property and figure out how to resolve transportation building. So, I mean, my takeaway from this, and I hope it's the same as the rest of the select committee, is we've got the Pineview Elementary School task ahead of us, find a remedy there, and otherwise we're good on the past designs. And from this point forward, we'll have the legislation that we look at later to ensure that we're not creating any more of these circumstances. But it's good to hear that we can clean this up, and hopefully after this year have this circumstance resolved. That's a great win for us if we do.
Thank you. Committee, any further thoughts? Okay, well, this wraps up our first session, the construction department's responses to our inquiries from last meeting. So I'll open it up now to public comment on any one of the updates. Plus, I know there are folks here that want to discuss, I believe, Hobbs Elementary, and I'm going to allow any public comment so that folks don't have to wait till the end of the day.
Do you want to wait until after the break for that, or do you want to do it?
I was hoping we could get to about 10:30 for the break. So if we could, because I think they're only going to speak a few minutes. So first of all, any public comment on any of the updates? Anybody online, Karen? No? Okay, all right. Thank you. Could I have those folks that wanted to make some comments on, I believe, Hobbs Elementary, please come forward and tell us who you are and share your thoughts with us.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Sarah Barrett, and this is my husband, PJ. And we are concerned parents of 2 children who attend elementary school at Hobbs Elementary here in Laramie County School District 1. We have a picture on our phone of the thermostat in our daughter's classroom from this week, and it read 85 degrees. We've since learned that other schools in this school district, and I'm sure across the state, have temperatures recorded at 88 degrees. We know that warm temperatures in Wyoming are temporary. The way that schools across our state are being penalized for addressing critical infrastructure needs is not. We both took time off of work today so that we can provide you with a parent's voice in this discussion. Kids in Wyoming are tough and they're resilient, so our concern is not that our kids are uncomfortable. And I really want you to know that that is not our concern. But we as parents, and my husband's a PTO board member at Hobbs, we spent the first couple of weeks of school trying to find quick and impactful solutions to our school's inadequate cooling system, and really it's a non-existent cooling system, so that our children and their teachers can focus on learning and not on how hot it is in the classroom. My husband's on the PTO, like I mentioned, and the PTO is supportive of purchasing portable AC units for each classroom. While pursuing this solution, we learned that it would overload the school's electrical system and potentially be considered an improvement which could affect their FCI score. We are concerned with how addressing critical infrastructure needs can lower a school's FCI score, thus creating an environment where schools and school districts are left with this choice. Do we create a safe and healthy environment for students by performing critical maintenance, or do we forego maintenance to keep our FCI score, which will allow for what really needs to be done, which is either major renovation or a new facility construction? We are concerned about the fairness and the equity in how FCI scores are calculated, and then how those scores are utilized across the state. If a school must have a new roof because it caved in, but no other critical infrastructure needs are addressed inside the facility, is that school really in a condition that is suitable and equitable for learning if the pipes are corroding and leaking and there are electrical issues, or if snow is blowing in through gaps in the windows? We believe the condition of some of the school facilities in Laramie County, and probably across our state as well, is creating a distraction from students' capacity to learn. We think a good start to solving this problem is to stop penalizing schools and school districts for performing critical maintenance related to health and safety by lowering their priority with the current FCI score methodology. Additionally, Laramie County has stood aside for the last 30 to 40 years to allow other school districts across the state to receive the money and support they have needed for their school facilities. Right now, Laramie County has 14 schools over 50 years old and 17 of the top 20 schools on the consolidated schedule from the school facilities 2022 annual report. We certainly don't envy the position that you're in, and we are not experts in this. We only started researching about 2 weeks ago. So we totally think that you're in a terrible position in trying to figure out how to fix this, and not only that, but the permanent funding solutions that you guys have to figure out. We ask that schools in Laramie County be treated fairly so that its children have adequate school facilities for learning. And we thank you for your time, and we appreciate you letting us kind of speak out of order and allowing us to voice our opinion. So thank you.
Any comments? Oh, no.
Just my support.
Okay, committee, any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Who have you worked with in the district, and have they provided any suggested remedies?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, over the past couple weeks.
Please, for the record, your name.
Oh, excuse me. My name is PJ Barrett. We have spoken to legislators, particularly Representative Landon Brown. Yeah. We've spoken to district staff and administrators, teachers, parents, and have gathered a lot of information and feedback on this particular topic.
But again, no suggested remedies in terms of the short-term solution?
So this morning, our PTO is still actively trying to figure out a solution. We really haven't gotten too much support from the school district itself or anybody else. It's really a PTO driven, trying to find a solution. This morning, they ran out and purchased portable fans for each classroom, which we don't believe will overload the electrical system in the school.
So, Mr. Chairman, putting on my engineer hat, I'm a chemical engineer, you want swamp coolers.
You know, we want,
Split systems.
we want facilities that are safe and healthy
No,
for
I-
our students year-round.
Absolutely, no, I agree with that. I'm just saying in the short term, right, the swamp cooler is basically the same energy as the fan, but it's actually providing cooling in high temperature, dry climates, which is what we have now. They're about a fifth of the energy consumption of an air conditioner. So they'll be the same power consumption that you have with the fan, but they'll provide cooling. So that's just the right immediate answer, and we should be paying for those, honestly, also.
Senator Rothfuss, I believe the costs they were looking at because of the electrical consumption they were talking about, I think they were looking at split system evaporators and condensers. Because a swamp cooler, evaporative cooler would not up the electrical requirement. So I think their PTO must have been looking at something more than a evaporative cooler. Am I correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, we've looked at a number of different temporary solutions. We all come back to the same roadblock, which is the electrical system in the school simply can't handle that many devices in each classroom working simultaneously. Even with simple space heaters during the wintertime, they've encountered this in the past when they've tried it, and the electrical system just simply can't handle the additional devices in the classrooms.
Additionally, Mr. Chairman, we have heard stories because we've asked our community, what are you doing in your schools? And there are other schools that are equally as in poor condition as Hobbs Elementary School, and teachers in those schools report that they can't even plug in an electric skillet without causing the lights to turn off in their classrooms.
Committee, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. and Ms. Barrett. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do we have anyone from Laramie County School District facilities here today?
Yes, we do. Andy, you want to come forward?
I'm Andy Knapp, Director of Facilities Support Operations for Laramie County School District 1.
Great. And I'm curious what is being looked at in terms of short-term. I know that long-term solution, we do have Hobbs and quite a few of these on the list for replacement and other remedies, but in terms of solving these immediate needs, what's being discussed?
So if I was going to just group that, we have about 12 schools that are in about 60 to 70-year-old range that when they were designed, they were not designed for air conditioning or an electrical load of, to meet any of the needs today. So in that same bunch of schools, we face the same issue with all of them. A lot of them they're inadequate as far as the distribution system for electrical within the school. And then of course, the source to the school, the load that actually is designed for that school or was designed at the time is not adequate to continue adding. From 70 years ago, the technology today, the lighting systems, the heating, any temporary cooling systems, we start running into, they start blowing breakers, shutting down, then it, weakens the breakers, and then pretty soon we have classrooms without power that the breaker won't stay on for the day. So we've always taken the stance that most of those portable units are not allowed in the classrooms. We've made exceptions some years to try and accommodate that. Generally, fans are the answer. And that's kind of where we're at today. We've looked at, I'm sorry, I apologize. We've looked at some of them possibly, retrofitting some type of rooftop units in them. Generally, if we have a structural engineer look at them, the structure that we have on those schools won't support the rooftop units, and actually have a report on 3 or 4 of those schools that came several years before I was in this position. They had to go in and reinforce the structural beams that were in those roofs already, just carrying the roof load that's on them. So that's that's kind of where we're at with those buildings in that particular group.
So, Mr. Chairman, to be clear, realistically, there isn't a remedy right now other than the long-term plan of replacing those schools. Is that fair?
Yeah, Chairman Pappas and Senator Rothfuss, the long-term plan is our best solution. We've always had a long-term plan, obviously, for, since the inception of the department and prior to that even. And this year we've spent revising it, seeing what we can do to possibly even consolidate some schools, either remodel or replace schools that are a good candidate for that, and then possibly reducing the total number of our schools in order to offset those costs. And we have a first phase of that that we've sort of opened up currently, and we're working on the continuation of that right now.
All right, I'll follow up with you a little bit on that. Thanks.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know what your district reserves, what balance might be for your district reserves, both on major maintenance as well as just general district reserves?
Chairman, Representative Walters, I do not have that exact number. I believe our reserves in major maintenance, we generally run at almost a full 10% in there, which is close to the 10 million each year. And going into next year, we do have some additional money to spend out of that. As far as that being a fix for the air conditioning on that particular block of schools, we've evaluated that and looked at it several times, and I don't think they're a candidate to use that on those.
Follow up?
Sure.
I guess the last part of your answer I don't track. Why wouldn't it be a candidate? Any kind of maintenance the district wants to do is at a local control level, and so I would think that you could spend your major maintenance dollars in your reserves fixing your schools in any way. So I need to track down a little farther on what your final comment was.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters. So the end of that comment is, let's use Hobbs, for example, that they just spoke to. We could not retrofit air conditioning into that school. The only way to do that would be to redo the entire heating system and probably put rooftop units on the school. The structural supports in that school have already had an engineered fix once just to get them to carry the roof load. So the only fix would be to go in and completely renovate that entire school. That entire school to be renovated is going to have to be taken all the way back down structurally and come up from the ground up, which is probably, just throwing a round number out there, Coyote Ridge that we're building just up the street from it right now, 2 blocks, has a construction cost of 26 million. I would think renovating that school is going to be in the neighborhood of 11 to 15 million at least. And I don't know that it's even going to be done for that. So it's not a candidate to just retrofit air conditioning into it. It'd be a candidate for complete remodel or replacement.
Committee, any other thoughts? My only concern was what Ms. Barrett brought up was that indeed, if we do, the replacement is or remodel is going to happen to all of these schools. One way or another, we have to provide an environment where children can learn, and they can't learn when it's 85 degrees in the classroom. So, and in freezing in the wintertime, it goes both ways. But the problem is we, as you all know, we don't have the funds to replace all these things immediately. And the question is if funds are expended to provide 5 or 6 years of remediation, say electrical system is upgraded so that you can provide some cooling, what does that do to the FCI score, as she mentioned? And it's troubling to me that we've determined these schools need replacement or renovation, and then we allow them to, and we know because we can't replace schools that it's going to be 6, 10 years down the line, who knows when, that we don't just lock them in to their current score and so that they don't have to be rescored because we've put some dollars into the building just to make it livable. That concerns me. I don't know if it concerns the rest of the committee. Well, we've got to come up with a way to be able to provide some relief to these schools that are way below facility requirements, way below what's needed for a learning environment, yet don't continue to move their score. Well, they'll never be accommodated. So I don't know. You know, it's a discussion we've had in the past, and it looks like we'll continue discussing it in the future, but it's something that we've got to get a handle on because our kids can't keep learning, will not learn in environments like this. So anyhow, my thoughts. Anything else before we take a break?
Chairman, I believe Senator Hutchings has something to say.
Okay, please bring her online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was sitting here contemplating what I was going to say and whether it was even feasible, first of all, the FCI score, can someone lay that out for me? And then as I sit and think about the way Hobbs is situated, it sits in the sun most of the day. And I was just wondering, is there some kind of blind system that we can use in the school, keeping the blinds low as the sun goes across the building? Are there some kind of trees we can plant out there temporarily, or some kind of shading system to use on the school? Just a thought, because I'm in the same, I guess, quandary as everybody else. What do we do? So if someone can answer those questions.
I certainly can. I'll let the department talk about the FCI score. That's a pretty intricate discussion, and I'm not sure we can go there today.
Just briefly, what it means, what the acronym means.
Facility Condition Index is the acronym. But to your point about providing some relief through shading, frankly, the ambient temperatures, even if you shade it, the ambient temperatures are too high. When you've got 95 degrees outside, I don't care how much shade you've gotten the transfer of heat from the exterior to the interior. These buildings, as you know, are very poorly insulated. That even if you shade them, the interior temperature is still going to climb to pretty much what the ambient temperature is. And also, every student, every person in that facility gives off BTUs. You know, a body at rest will give out 450 BTUs just at rest. And you know, kids, they're never at rest. And then certainly the lighting loads, you know, all the equipment inside there, it's generating internal heat. So there's not enough shading. You certainly can't plant trees. I mean, it'll be years. We'll replace the school before the trees grow. So I don't see any reason to spend the funds that were required to put in shading devices over the school. Certainly they have blinds already on the windows. And again, I'm sure they close those when there's direct sun coming in, but you know, that's another problem. You don't want kids learning in the dark either. That's we provide adequate sunlight because the learning environment requires adequate sunlight. Natural sunlight is best for the learning environment, and the more you block the sun, the more internal you turn on more lights. So in my opinion, shading is not an answer. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, but I hope that answered the question for you, Senator Hutchings. Okay, is there any other comments on this subject? If not, we'll go to break. I'd like to, it's about 10:40. Let's come back in 15 minutes, okay? All right, thank you. Okay, can we come back to order now, please? I keep this ball rolling. I have knuckles.
We're moving forward.
Okay, let's see, do we have enough folks here? We don't have enough folks here. We need to, we have 2 online. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's press on. We're at the point to discuss draft legislation. So Tanya, would you please take us through the legislation?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office Operations Administrator, as well as Mr. Wilmarth to my right, also from the Legislative Service Office, Senior School Finance Analyst. You have 3 bills before you, 23 LSO 124, 125, and 126. All 3 bills were requested at your last meeting. We'll begin with 23 LSO 124, which is school capital construction, transfers, and distribution. The direction from the committee at your previous meeting was to operationalize the provisions that are currently contained in section 300C of the budget bill. Which generally transfers funds from the SIPA major maintenance sub-account and the school lands mineral royalties account to the state school, or excuse me, the school capital construction account. In addition, the bill prioritizes the transfers from the school major maintenance sub-account over the transfer to the penitentiary in 94220-1. With that, I'll go ahead and walk through the bill, Mr. Chairman. The substance of the bill is contained on page 2, lines 1 through page 3, lines 2. This contains amendments to provisions to 9-4-220. This statute governs the SIPA, which is the Strategic Investments Projects account, and includes the creation of the school major maintenance sub-account. The substance of the amendment can be found on the bottom of page 2, lines 19 through 22, and on to page 3, lines 1 and 2. As I stated, this language currently exists in your budget bill. It was adopted, it's been adopted, I think, in the last 2 biennials. And what it does is it transfers the money from the sub-account to the state capital construction account. It automates that transfer. Moving on to page 3, lines 9 and 10. This is the piece that prioritizes the transfer from the SIPA to the sub-account over the transfer to the state penitentiary capital construction account. Currently, LSO staff believes that there's an ambiguity between which of these transfers would occur first. Historically, there hasn't been an issue with regard to the funds, and so both of these items have happened, but the Joint Appropriations Committee as well as the budget staff have asked us to bring this forward within this bill draft. Moving on to page 3, lines 19, page 4, lines 10. This amends the statute that creates the school lands mineral royalties account. You'll note on page 4, lines 5 through 10, this language is very similar to the language previously discussed. And again, this just automates the transfer of the funds within this account to the school capital construction account. This act is effective immediately. That language can be found on lines 12 through 15 on page 4. And the reason that it's effective immediately is in light of the change on page 3, lines 9 and 10 with regard to the prioritization of the transfers from the SIPA account to the state penitentiary account and the sub-account.
Okay, thank you. Committee, Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And being the new guy on the up here and the only representative at the moment, I guess. Could you refresh our memory of what problem we're trying to solve with this?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, certainly. The direction was to automate the transfers to the school capital construction account. It's an issue that the Joint Appropriations has looked at and this committee has looked at as well. As I stated previously, for the last 2 biennials, this process has been contained within the budget bill. And so as an effort to formalize and codify that process that has been operationalized and been utilized to fund the school capital construction account, this includes it basically in your green book, rather than having it in the budget to be adopted every 2 years. And Matt can probably speak to the necessity of the transfers for purposes of cash flowing the school capital construction account.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Jennings, the state auditor under the draft bill and also the budget language utilizes these transfers at periods in which is necessary to cash flow the school capital construction account. Historically, there's been a substantial balance in the school capital construction account from historical COLIS bonus revenues. As those have dwindled, the legislature has required them to ensure that there's enough cash flow in the school capital construction account from these revenue sources for periods for which major maintenance payments are made, as well as capital construction projects from which the appropriations are made. And so, as Ms. Hytrek indicated, this just codifies existing practice that the legislature has adopted through its budget bill.
Representative Jennings,
Thank you,
further
Mr. Chairman.
questions?
So 3 biennium ago, was there problems with this? Is that why we moved to this way?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Jennings, there's a little bit more backstory on just kind of these revenue sources. The first is the state mineral royalties, which are now contained in the school lands mineral royalties account, used to actually flow directly to the school capital construction account. There was no transfer of funds. Those actually were deposited directly to the school capital construction account. I believe it was in the 2017 or 2018 session, the legislature created the school lands mineral royalties account and increased the amount of state royalties flowing to the school capital construction account from $8 million annually to a full 1/3 of the state royalties amount. By the Constitution, the legislature can appropriate 1/3 of the state royalties on school lands for purposes of K-12 education. So that new account and the process to increase from 8 million annually to the full 1/3 redirected those revenues from the school capital construction account to a separate account. And so since that time, the legislature has automated these transfers only on a 2-year basis through the budget bill. The second transfer here is a new revenue source for K-12 education. And this, again, I believe was in the 2018-2019 session, but this, or the 2021-22 biennium was the first year that the legislature has appropriated investment earnings from the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund for purposes of K-12 education. Those earnings are deposited within the sub-account in the SIPA, and those are then transferred by the budget bill to the school capital construction account. That is a new revenue source that the legislature has dedicated to K-12 education and specifically for the school capital construction account.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, Matt, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I hope that helped Representative Jennings to understand where we come from and where we are today. Can you remind us how those payments go out to the districts and why that, why this cash flow issue is what it is?
Sure, Mr. Chairman and Senator Landon, these revenue sources are deposited within the school capital construction account, which support the appropriations from the school capital construction account. These don't pay for all of your major maintenance or school capital construction projects. The legislature has supplemented for the past couple biennia from the SIPA, Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account, the General Fund, the LSRA, other accounts to the school capital construction account to fully fund those appropriations. In big picture terms, major maintenance payments are paid out on a quarterly basis beginning on July 1 of each year. That is approximately about $20 million per payment. And then the construction projects are paid on an invoice basis from school districts as those projects are constructed or designed, or component projects are paid for. So, Mr. Chairman, that's kind of a quick summary of the cash flow out of the school capital construction account.
Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, one of the challenges that I have found, having been on this committee for a while, is just that it's always assumed that we're just talking about construction. And we're never just talking about construction. You know, we've got major maintenance monies that have to go out. And so that's our challenge. We're going to have a lot of newcomers to the body this coming year. And I think we just need to remember to help them understand that we're not just talking about building a new building somewhere. We're talking about all the money that has to go out to take care of the ones we've already got. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Tanya, can you tell me, I mean, we've seen this before, have we not? And can you tell me what is there any substantial differences since the last time we visited this?
Mr. Chairman, you have seen a similar bill. This body, this committee took it up last year. You'll recall that last year was a bit broader. It actually eliminated the state penitentiary capital construction account and transferred those funds, which would have been approximately $40 million, to the school capital construction account. At the last meeting, your direction was to eliminate that particular provision and only tackle the automation to the school capital construction account from those two accounts I mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I think it's good to catch up on that. My question to the committee is, should these two items actually be separated? The transfer of funds from the penitentiary account versus the rest of the bill. Any thoughts on trying to put both of them together in a single bill? I mean, one may kill the other.
Mr. Chairman?
Are we good to, Senator Hutchins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm gonna, if you don't mind me going back just a little bit before someone answers your question, I kind of wanted to know, as Representative Jennings, what we're trying to do here, and you can tell me if I have this right or wrong. When we see this particular transfer in the budget, the body is making a decision whether we want to make these transfers or not. Every year we see it. Do we want to do it? Don't want to do it. If I have you right. But what we're trying to do in this bill is make these transfers automatic, where the body doesn't really have a say, it just happens. Is that what we're doing here?
In my view, yeah, that's correct. We are making what we have historically done just automatic, so that the auditor's office can have that ability for the cash flow issue. And frankly, you know, we do need these funds to continue on. It's not a matter, I mean, we could, I guess, micromanage every dollar of the entire budget if we wanted to do so, but we don't. There's certain items that we know we are going to spend money on, and since you know, the loss of the coal bonus monies and we've relied now on these new sources of funds for continuing our funding of education, certainly of the facilities through the school capital construction account. And so I think that making these automatic just makes perfect sense. Certainly will help out in on our cash flow problems. If staff would like to weigh in on that question.
No,
Can I
Mr.
insert
Chairman.
a follow-up before she answers?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Tanya. The follow-up would be question, how have we historically voted? Is it just yep, that's good, let's do it, let's do it? Or has there been some adjustments being made through historically? It's kind of like my bank account. I don't want an overdraft. I don't want to, not that it happens, but I don't want money automatically going from one place to another without my knowing what's happening. That's where my question really lies. Maybe as a guardian of the people's liberty, we do want to micromanage, but historically, have we been doing that? Or historically, have we just allowed whatever they want to transfer by voting yes? And now we're kind of wasting our time. If we're doing it every year or every 2 years saying yes, let's just go ahead and do it. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think maybe Matt may be able to answer your question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as I indicated in my previous comments, the state royalties used to just automatically be deposited in the school capital construction account. The legislature, about 4 years ago, chose to create a new account and deposit these state royalty funds, not just $8 million annually, but 1/3 of the state royalties on school lands. And so those would have just sat in an account had the legislature not or transfer those to the school capital construction account. These transfers currently reside in the budget balancer section of the budget bill. So in order to balance the revenues to the appropriations within the school capital construction account, these transfers are located in the budget bill's budget balancer section. They may not be reviewed in detail by all legislatures, but the Joint Appropriations Committee does have several transfers, not just for these two accounts, but several accounts to ensure that the balances in the budget reserve account, the LSRA, the general fund, several other accounts are adequate to meet the appropriation needs. This bill would do what a lot of accounts have done, which is deposit funds within that account automatically and not be voted on every 2 years or every year. An example, our federal money royalties are distributed in a formulaic manner. Your school foundation program account has an automatic transfer from the legislative stabilization reserve account to ensure at the end of each fiscal year, there's a $100 million balance. That's not voted on by the legislature annually. That's a codified section of law. And so I could rattle off a few more, but that just gives you an example of two automatic transfers for funds that the legislature does not vote on annually or biannually.
So this wouldn't be any different. Can you tell me, has the Appropriations Committee had any comment on this at all?
Mr. Chairman, the Appropriations Committee is looking at this issue, but in a broader context, and I'm sure Representative Walters could speak to that better than I can. But my understanding is, in the event that this committee were to pass this legislation, we would recommend that the chairman send a memo to the Joint Appropriations Committee advising them of this bill.
Mr. Chairman, just to add on to that a little bit, September 12th, I believe that's Monday, the Joint Appropriations Committee will hear from staff on a much more broader concept, not just these two accounts in this concept, but a much more statewide look on accounts and transfers. And so, as Tanya indicated, it would be appropriate if the committee does take action on this bill today, that you do communicate to them as what your action was and what they may be able to piggyback on. But I think that might have been part of the issue last year is the communication between the select committee and the appropriations committee wasn't as clear on what committees were doing, because this bill was actually taken up by the House Appropriations Committee last year, and I'm not sure they were fully aware of what the select committee undertook during the interim in related to the similar approach.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walters.
I really support this bill. I might make a slight amendment when we get the bill moved and whatnot. But really, this bill, in my mind, it increases transparency, because we, the legislature, are going to approve an amount of money to spend on major maintenance and on new construction for schools, et cetera. And that money always comes from the school capital construction account. And so having all of these various sub-accounts that after we have said we were willing to spend X amount on major maintenance and on construction, now we have to go back to all these sub-accounts and transfer the money into the school capital construction account to be able to pay our bills that we have already said we want to pay in a previous action. So by having this money flow direct to the account, everyone knows how full the account is, how much is there, and everyone can then look back and say, okay, if there's this much in the account available, there's this much available for expenditure. It makes it a lot easier to track. It makes it a lot easier to follow. Makes it a lot easier for people outside of this room to follow. So as I said, I really support this bill and would encourage the rest of the committee to support it.
Thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in agreement with Representative Walters, we create these sub-accounts, temporary holding accounts, and all of these different coffee cans that lead to a tremendous amount of confusion. We literally created a few years ago an account which was a capital construction holding account within the SIPA, where all of the money will be transferred to the school capital construction account, but isn't until somebody ordains it to be true. That's basically what we previously did, so that it could be wrestled with potentially by the appropriations or redirected somewhere else. And it leads to confusion, and it also leads to a profiling of not having those funds available within the school capital construction account. This tries to remedy that previous concern, I guess we'll say, and directs it back to how it previously was, which to me is a lot more direct and obvious accounting. Again, you can disagree with or agree with the funding, the path of funding, how much funding goes in. That's a good subject of debate. But the idea that we have to have it in an intermediary holding account with the same name on it, but that's titled holding account that can't be spent, honestly just seems overly complicated and bureaucratic, and I don't see the objective of it. I think this helps us solve that. One other point realistically is we don't even know what we're doing with the SIPA at this point in time. There's basically no money in the SIPA. I think there's around $4 million in the SIPA right now based on some reversions. And that was something we worked in the last budget, was the idea of moving things out of the SIPA for us to have a temporary holding account present in an account that isn't even necessarily going to continue to exist moving forward. Once again, I think this is probably a clearer approach for the public and for us in the legislature to understand where the money's flowing.
Thank you. Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question would be either for LSO or for Representative Walters. So if we do this as a select committee, how does that intertwine with what the appropriations is doing? Because it sounds to me like maybe we're duplicating some of the same things that they're trying to do. So if somebody could speak to that a little bit.
Who would like to answer that?
Mr. Chairman, this committee certainly has the latitude to take up this bill individually and advise JEC. I'm not familiar with the joint appropriations actions that they're going to consider on September 12th, but what I do know is that it's a much broader scope. This is a much more limited, targeted solution relative only to schools' capital construction. So I don't know that it's inconsistent with what JEC will be taking up. And as you know, you never know if a bill is going to pass or not, and so perhaps their bill would fail and this would succeed. I guess that would be my comment on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, and I think it would be important for us to just send a little letter along to the JAC chairman to say that the intent of this is to remove the intermediary account, and we would like it directly forwarded onto the school capital construction account. Now, if they have a broader solution, the hope would be that they would incorporate our intent into their broader solution, but the standalone bill then allows us to have a vehicle for it regardless of whether the Appropriations Committee ends up engaging in that way. I do think that they'll fundamentally change the way SIPA is structured, and that they'll need to probably amend this section of statute also. So that won't surprise me if our bill ends up being drawered at the end of it all. But either way, as long as we achieve the objective of not having the intermediary holding account within the SIPA as the point of confusion, it doesn't matter how we get there. I just think it's a good objective, and it's within our purview at this time to just have our own bill to get that vehicle going.
Okay, thank you. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the representative. I think just to add a couple of thoughts onto what the senator just said, I think we all recognize that it's still not enough in that account. But this bill just simply says, let's profile it where we know that we're going to need it. You know, we've got major maintenance expenditures of 150 to 200 million every time we come down, and all this does is say, let's profile it there. I think the Appropriations Committee knows where it comes from. We know where it comes from, but it's in a line item. That way our public can go there and know exactly what we've got in the school capital construction account. And that's what I like about it. I share Representative Walter's feelings on that. I think it's much more transparent. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask before we take a motion or work on the bill, is there anyone out in the public that want to comment on this particular bill? Okay, I'm going to ask for comment after each bill rather than wait for all of them. So anybody online, Karen, at all? Okay, so we'll close public comment on LSO 0124. And committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I would move the bill.
Okay, moved and seconded by Representative Walters and seconded by Senator Landon. Any comments, questions, amendments? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to amend the bill on page 3 from line 4 to line 17, eliminating the section referring to the state penitentiary capital construction account. And if I get a second, I will explain my...
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because that section is not directly related to school major maintenance or school capital construction, I think it creates a little bit of a distraction to the bill, to where I think it detracts from what we're trying to accomplish with the other two components of this bill. And so I think if we want to do something with the penitentiary account, if we want to move that money directly, move that money indirectly, or anything else, it should be a standalone discussion and not tied to this piece of legislation. The other two sections of this, as I said earlier, really are an increase or improvement in transparency and make a lot of sense. They're already tied to this account, and so it makes sense to keep the focus narrow, and so that's why I propose the amendment.
Okay. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Just a question, you know, I remember working on this and putting this in, but it comes down to, in the absence of it, is there a concern about ambiguity of order of operations, which I think was one of the original motivating factors, where there's no clear order of operations for the funding. I mean, you do have the phrase, or as much thereof as is available from any unobligated funds. I guess the question then is, are these obligated funds, if we have them obligated above? And it's my understanding that we haven't run into that problem directly because funds were available sufficient. That's accurate?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And if you recall, the SIPA is guaranteed from the Permanent Wine Mineral Trust Fund Reserve account. And so this biennium and likely next biennium, there is light likely no anticipation where the full 1.25% of the spending policy will not be guaranteed.
Right, okay, so Mr. Chairman, then moving forward, okay, I see it. So we don't have the funds available in the SIPA to backstop anything, and therefore we'll end up having to draw in that circumstance. I think we need it, and I guess I would ask, what do we think happens if we pass this bill without this paragraph there? What's our best guess of the path forward if we don't make this this change on lines 9 and 10?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, it's impossible to tell, but I can tell you that Legislative Council, as well as the Director of the Budget Fiscal Division, they brought this to our attention last year, and it was their question that prompted the discussion before this committee last year. And to your point, yes, it is an order of operations question. It's not presented itself previously. We believe that, transfer to the sub major maintenance account would occur prior to the transfer to the state penitentiary capital construction account, but it is not clearly delineated in statute.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Walters.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to withdraw my amendment.
Okay. That amendment's been withdrawn. And the second with,
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
okay, so we're back on the motion. Any other further discussion? Question being called. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Hutchins, please.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, I don't know if Matt, as I was writing down what he was saying, if he gave a historical, if he gave an answer on my question on the historical votes on this, do we typically just approve this or not? I didn't get an answer. At least I didn't get it written down.
Matt?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hutchings, apologies if I didn't answer that directly.
Thank you, sir.
The legislature for the past two biennial budgets have voted to approve these transfers from the school lands mineral royalties account and the SIPA through the budget bill. So there's a Section 300 budget balancer that has several transfers, and so while this section may not have been voted on directly, the budget bill itself has been, and it's been approved by the legislature.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now could we please have the roll call?
Senator Hutchings,
I'm gonna say aye because it's gonna go through appropriations with a letter, so I'll say aye for now.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Senator Landon, Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Harshman is excused. Representative Jennings, Representative Walters, Vice Chairman Brown is also excused, and Chairman Pappas.
Aye.
The vote is 8 aye, 2 excused.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Without
Senator.
objection, I'd ask that we send a little note over to the General Appropriations Chairs along with this draft legislation saying what's up.
I think per our staff, we're going to be writing a letter.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, we will do that. Would you like to have this as a House or a Senate bill? Senate file or a House bill?
I think we'll.
You guys can balance that later.
Yeah, we'll figure it out later. I mean, I'll discuss it with the co-chair. Okay, let's move on to our second bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the second bill was also requested by the committee, 23 LSO 125. The direction here was to authorize the expenditure of major maintenance funds to address building elements that were necessary to improve the delivery of education. Recall in part, this discussion surrounded the Park Elementary renovation discussion. And so with that, I'll go ahead and walk through the bill. Page 2, lines 1 through 22, and then on to page, just that, page 2, lines 1 through 22, amends 2115-109, which is the major maintenance provisions in the statute, and specifically the definition of major building and facility repair and replacement. You'll note on line 12, there's a deletion of at its original capacity. This deletion is required so that in the event that you do have additional capacity, as was with the case with the Park Elementary School, it's not prohibited under this particular provision. Moving on, lines 16 through 21. This is the substance of the amendment, and this modifies the definition of major maintenance to include the repair and replacement of complete or major portions of a school building to improve the functionality as necessary to enable districts to deliver required educational programs. And I would note this language, deliver required educational programs, is utilized in other locations in Title 21, Chapter 15, governing capital construction in the context of sort of the larger discussion about renovation or remodels or new construction. This bill is effective July 1st of 2023. That can be found on page 3, line 2. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
I do have one question, just a little confusion on my part. It's probably just me being confused, but on line 18, the language says complete or major portions. So I don't know what a complete portion of the school is. Does that mean the replacement of the entire school? I don't know what, I can see major portions, but I don't know what the word complete means there.
Mr. Chairman, this language is actually present, if you look above on lines 9 and 10, this is part of the existing definition of major building, facility, and repair and replacement. So these are those are terms that the school facilities department, along with the commission, has been administering for a decade.
It still confuses me what a complete portion is. How can it be a portion if it's complete? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, I see the structure as parallel language with above, where the first is basically to continue its original purpose effectively. And the second concept is with the motivation of enabling the school district to deliver required educational programs. So it's really two different parallel structures with different motivations, and that's the change. The question I have is, one of the discussions we have frequently had is the idea of reconfiguration of the structure, not just replacement or repair of the structure. So this comes into the dividing a large room into 2 rooms, and now instead of having a 50-person classroom, which I don't have a lot of purpose for, I've got 2 25-person classrooms, and that then is for educational program purposes. That's consistent with the second half, but I'm struggling to see whether our verbs above complete, to repair or replace, would meet that. It almost seems like we would need a reconfiguration verb or something along those lines to achieve it. So what are your thoughts on that, Tanya and Matt and others?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we might turn to the department for just some practical sort of knowledge on how this is being administered on the ground. I'm not certain if they're authorizing classrooms to be bifurcated with rooms under this provision or not. I do know they have broad rulemaking authority. As we all know, they've changed their rules relatively recently, but perhaps Valerie or Jerry would like to testify about that.
Personally, I think you have a valid point there. Certainly, you could amend in a comma reconfiguration.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
in there. So, yeah, Senator Landon.
Yeah, I appreciate the senator bringing that up, because you might remember one of the prompts was this whole issue of structural modification that made common sense, but we were being prohibited from from moving a wall that was just simply in the way or dividing an area like the senator pointed out. So I just want to make sure we catch that because I think that was one of the original prompts here. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, and I am remiss, I apologize. There is existing language in 2115-109 that further delineates the definition of major building facility and repair and replacement that does include system improvements, which means the repair, replacement, or upgrade of components or equipment of school district buildings, including structural systems. That list continues, but that's one of the lists there.
Mr. Chairman, what was the reference there? Is that under Romanet 3 after the colon? Is that where we would
Yes.
find that? Thank you.
There are various paragraphs A through C that further delineate what qualifies for those major maintenance expenditures. Code compliance is the first. The second are site improvements. And then the last is system improvements. And there's a specific delineation for structural systems under that. I apologize.
And Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss.
You know, one other concern that maybe this is getting at, but maybe it's not, that I just recall a great anecdotal of parking lot for the new high school in Laramie, where we didn't have it originally funded. There was a desire to have major maintenance used to have another parking lot, but since it didn't already exist, you can't use major maintenance for it. So what the district then did was use internal funds to create a very low quality parking lot, which then exists. So then it's legal to upgrade it using major maintenance funds, which is clever, but maybe we don't have to be so clever always. So if we can structure this in such a way that if it just bloody makes sense, you get to do things like that. And again, getting back to the idea of some reconfiguration concepts. I don't know quite how you do that. That might be outside the scope of this legislation, but it's another one that has come up over the years, are those, well, it doesn't exist, so you can't repair it, type discussions that we have. And I don't know how to work around that. That's another thing that, if we have any ideas from the department on how we could tweak the language, I would appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think the language as proposed addresses this issue with the deletion of "at its original capacity." And again, paragraph B includes site improvements and specifically articulates parking lots.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, further questions, comments? I'm going to now, since we don't have any public comment on this bill. I'm assuming nothing online? Okay. All right, public comment is closed. What's your pleasure? Okay, Senator Cost moved the bill. Seconded by Representative Walters. Yes, Senator Landon.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate Tanya pointing to line 12. That does help, but I want to make sure that, that's related to original capacity. I just want to make sure that our districts have a little bit of flexibility there that may or may not be related to any capacity issue. Am I overthinking this? I mean, I'm trying to make sure that we get the language to a point where it represents our desire to give a little bit more flexibility. And it may or may not deal with capacity. Does that make sense, Mr. Chairman?
It does make sense. I believe that the language that Senator Roth is proposing actually will add a little more flexibility, at least more clarity in my mind.
Mr. Chairman? And yeah, I do want to make sure we get feedback from the department on this to see if there would be any unintended consequences, particularly if we mirror the language up on lines 8 through 10, which I think would be appropriate. But the concept being, for example, page 2, line 9, where it says means the repair or replacement of,
changing that to repair, comma, reconfiguration or replacement of, and then mirroring identically on 17 and 18. So it's again, repair, comma, reconfiguration or replacement of.
Sounds like a motion for an amendment.
Yeah, I'll move that amendment. If we can get a second, we can look into,
Okay.
we can
have
look into
sec-
whether it's a good idea or a bad idea.
Senator Cost seconded it. Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor. Any comments? Representative, excuse me, Senator Landon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now I flip to the other side of the coin, and I just, let's just talk this through, make sure we don't have any unintended consequences. I'm looking at the director, reconfiguration. I don't want to get out over the tops of our skis here either, but I think this addresses one of the concerns that the former chairman ran into in a district. I was alongside, and are we okay? I mean, reconfiguration, we don't want them rebuilding the entire school. But
We have replacement already in there.
To rebuild the entire school the same way. And Mr. Chairman? One other note on that is, for the first half, the existing language would still maintain the intended use, so for its original intended use. So you'd be reconfiguring, but still for its original intended use, as is typically accomplished. So if it's an educational institution, you're reconfiguring it to be an educational institution. You don't make it a bus barn, that kind of thing. So you're still pretty narrow for that part. And then for the new language on lines 16 through 21, it would be a reconfiguration with the purpose, as we see on line 19, to improve the functionality of a building or facility as necessary to enable the school district to deliver required educational programs. You're still actually pretty narrow, I think, because you have intent on both points of either not changing the original intent or having a change of intention, but it has to be to deliver required educational programs. So I do think we end up with some fairly respectable sideboards, even if we have reconfiguration. But I would ask if the department wants to provide a comment on the word reconfiguration. Maybe we're getting ourselves into a problem there.
Mr. Chair, I struggle with reconfiguration and those things as well. If you go back to the conversation that we had about Pine View and would we resurrect that design and with the same architect and the cost? Well, if the rooms were 800 square feet each, the classrooms, and reconfiguration due to new programming says 1,000 square feet each, every load-bearing wall, every structural and everything completely changes and throws those plans out the door. And so that would have killed that project right there, even if it was viable in other ones. So when I hear those terms and they're broad in their sense, and I understand why we'd want to do that, to give the district the flexibility to do that, I think you're opening a door that as long as this stays within a major maintenance bill, if you can't get there in major maintenance money, then you can't move all 25 walls around, right? So it's got to be done within the context of their own budget. They have the local role and control in which to do that, but the word is wide open, and so that concerns me in terms of where it could go dollar-wise. At the end of the day, it's their major maintenance money, and they choose how to spend it.
Well, to me, it's actually more clarifying because right now we're just talking about repair or replacement of the major portion of the building. And there's really no language that says you can reconfigure it. You either repair it or completely replace it. I see it more clarifying than it is making it broader. Again, it's in the context of all the rest of the language in the bill and in that section of statute. So I think it clarifying it, it's not broadening it in my view. Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So to the director, you see any hurdles with respect to developing rules in this little bit of language that we've added?
Mr. Chair and Senator Landon, I don't see hurdles. I think you're addressing it better than what it was. I would agree, Senator Pappas. The question was, do I see some concerns in there? And those are some of the concerns that I see. Right.
Okay.
Well, I think there's always concerns when we start passing laws.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
And, you know, one of the realities that we always face is that that unintended consequence. But I think what we know right now is we know that through the previous language, we've had some unintended consequences of being overly restrictive where major maintenance can't be used in ways that we would like it to be used. If we add the language of reconfiguration, there is the danger of that being too broad. But again, we're narrowing in on, we solve the problem. I think we effectively solve the problem that leads to this, which is these circumstances where you have a room that is not appropriate educationally, that you could make appropriate educationally using a limited amount of major maintenance. So we solve that problem. In the absence of better language, which may be out there, and I'm welcome of it if it occurs, I think we should include the reconfiguration, try to make that better, and then if it does turn out a few years from now that it's too broad and it's being used in ways that we don't like, well, this committee is still going to be kicking around, and we can come back and figure out how to fix it then too. But I know that we're too constrictive and we're unable to achieve some of the objectives that seem perfectly rational, obvious, and reasonable. Everyone agrees they're great solutions. Nobody ever says bad idea. We just say, well, that's against the statute. So this is a solution to those problems, and I think we should still move forward with the amendment and then try to find some better language if we can as we work through the process.
I agree. We passed this out of this committee. Certainly, we'll see it again in session, and between now and then, you know, we'll have plenty of time for folks to think about anything better. So, any further comments? Tanya?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one suggestion. I guess the question and then a suggestion. There are other places within this statute that talk about major building and facility repair and replacement. The title of the statute, the definition on on line 8, in the new language. One option that you might consider is under paragraph C, which reads, system improvements means the repair, replacement, or upgrade of components or equipment of school district buildings, including the structural system. You could put reconfiguration there as well,
Mr. Chairman?
rather than adding it repeatedly.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with the second, let's just provide the staff with the discretion to enable this concept without necessarily going with the specific wording, because I think Tanya's exactly right. And I do note that it should be on line 8 as well. So let's see, where would you put it? Yeah. Yeah, I think Tanya's exactly right. On the B paragraph of site improvements, since that's included. Well, it's included as a subset of what we're talking about here for Romanet 3. It's explicitly included. If you just add a reconfiguration as a site improvement, that rolls up into it, and that probably is a much easier solution without having to change it 9 times. So yeah, so I'll just amend my original amendment wording, if it's okay with the second, to provide Tanya and Matt with the discretion to do it better than I suggested.
Which would include another article in here.
Yeah, it just makes it slightly longer, Bill.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are we okay with the second? Okay. All right, so question on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, so that amendment has passed. Any question back on the bill draft? Okay, question's been called.
Mr.
Roll call,
Chairman.
please. What? Senator Hutchins, did you have a comment?
Just a quick one. Is it, we're gonna meet again for this committee?
Yes, we do. Well, we're going to meet in Laramie.
Right, one of the questions I had, and yes or no, it seems like you guys are really concerned about this bill. Like you say, the unintended consequences. Is it possible to hold it back, get all those questions answered? So the people that seem to be, the senators that seem to be concerned can be very confident that this is the way to go? Or do you want to just rush it through and get it voted on today?
I think we're voting on this bill draft.
Right.
To amend the draft. We actually will need to look at the new language again.
Mr. Chairman.
I think we won't know what will change, what will have changed, will we? Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there is no reason for us not to just take a look at it, get the updated language, amend it in, and then pass it as a clean bill. And in that way, at the next meeting, I don't see a problem with that. I'm comfortable either way, honestly, because I do think that getting the intent across is no problem. But if the senator is interested in seeing it, the final form before voting on it, I don't think it's going to take us very long to work that at the next meeting. I'm not averse to that.
Could I ask for our staff's advice?
Mr. Chairman, it's completely the prerogative of the committee. You can certainly vote on it as amended with the change to paragraph C. We did that yesterday with the joint education bill. I think it's fairly straightforward, the directive to staff. That being said, if you'd like to see it at the next meeting, we'll certainly put it on the agenda.
I'm frankly inclined, we'll have plenty of business to do next time, and not so sure that we really, I think the intent of what we want to do is pretty clear, even if we don't know these exact words, but I'll leave it up to the committee to decide. What, Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to the senator, having been the one to bring up any unintended consequences, that was merely for us to talk it through and have a little bit of conversation about the language that we were amending into the bill. I'm perfectly comfortable with where the bill is now. Glad to vote on it today, would be glad to vote on the bill in October, but just wanted to make sure the senator knew I'm good. But I think the caution is always, let's make sure we talk it through and address every angle. So thank you.
Senator
Thank
Hutchins?
you, Senator Landon. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to read that provision too with the new language, if that might help.
Please.
So under 2115-109, which is in your bill, there are 3 additional categories: code compliance, site improvements, and system improvements. And pursuant to Senator Rothfuss' direction, it will read: system improvements mean the repair, replacement, reconfiguration, or upgrade of components or equipment of school district buildings, including, and there's a list there of 8 items, one of which is structural systems.
Okay. That's perfectly clear to me. Yeah, it seems logical. So let's do that. We've already passed that amendment. We're on the bill. I think we'll take a, question's been called. We'll take a roll call today.
On 23 LSO-0125 as amended, Senator Hutchings,
No.
Senator Cost,
Yes.
Senator Landon, Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Harshman is excused, Representative Jennings, Representative Walters, Vice Chairman Brown is excused, and Chairman Pappas.
Aye.
So it is 6 aye, 2 no, and 2 excused.
Thank you. Okay, now we're to our final bill LSO 0126, school facilities appropriations.
Mr. Chairman, the third and final bill that you requested staff draft for purposes of this meeting was to authorize or allow the legislature to appropriate a single sum for design and construction. What I would note before I walk the bill is that this does not change the statutory directives with regard to the commission's budget presentation to this body. It also doesn't change the provisions dealing with the reporting requirements in the event that they do deviate from the budget submitted to this committee. With that, I'll go ahead and move to the substance of the bill. Page 2, line 1 through page 3, line 2 amends 2115-119. This is the provision governing the commission's budget as well as the recommendation from this body to the legislature. You'll note on lines 5 and 6 that there's an elimination of the requirement. It's an elimination of the language "and recommended by the Select Committee on School Facilities." And that language is necessary. It needs to be deleted because you can go, pursuant to this bill draft, this committee will be able to make recommendations to the legislature for a single sum appropriation for design and construction. However, the budget request from the commission will still have line items for each of those items: planning, design, construction. The budget presentation from the commission does not change under this bill draft. Again, it's a conforming amendment on lines 10 through 13, as well as the additional language which provides that shall separately identify amounts for design. Moving on, lines 13, this deletes the word appropriation. And working this language, it's evident that there was sort of a commingling of terms in this particular section as well as in 2811-301. And so really, in preparing this draft, attempted to delineate the difference between an appropriation and an expenditure by the commission. Moving on, the substance of the amendment and the request at the bottom of page 2, lines 22 and on to page 3, lines 1 and 2. This is a very straightforward sentence that allows the legislature to make one appropriation for both design and construction phases. Page 3, lines 4 through 12, amends 28-11-301. This is the statute governing the commission as well as this body. And you'll note on line 16, there's a deletion of such. It's just unnecessary and confusing. And then moving on to lines 17 through 19, this clarifies that the commission will still be required to report any transfer of funds between projects, regardless of whether the legislature appropriates a single sum for design and construction. And the effective date of this bill is July 1st of 2023, and that can be found on page 4, line 2.
Thank you. Committee, any thoughts or questions of staff? Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm generally, as I'm going through this, I think I'm in agreement with all of the new parts that we're putting in. But what concerns me is lines 5 and 6 that have statutorily been this committee's obligation or oversight. And I'm just curious, what's the rationale that we want to remove ourselves from, being in concert with the commission?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, this provision on lines 5 and 6 doesn't hamstring this committee or the legislature. It eliminates the requirement that the select committee appropriate as one-to-one with the commission's budget, which will identify each project by planning, design, and construction. That language, and recommended by the Select Committee on School Facilities, if you keep reading lines 7 and 8, provided it has to be attached to a specified project for a budget period and shall separately identify amounts for design phase and construction phase projects. And the intent of the bill is to eliminate or authorize the legislature to appropriate a single sum for design and construction, which is the language on lines 22 and on to page 3. The first portion of that statute, where you're looking, actually governs the presentation of the commission's budget to this body.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being the new guy, not understanding this easily, but it sure looks to me like it seems like that it's a stronger position if this is recommended by the select committee also in concert with the commission. But by striking that, it seems like that it's giving more authority to the commission to do this more unilaterally.
And Mr. Chairman, there are other provisions in the statute governing the presentation of the budget, as well as the recommendation, and this body is actually required by 28-11-301 by November 1st each year to prepare and submit a budget recommendation based upon the information reported by the Commission and the State Construction Department, addressing statewide building and facility needs to the Joint Appropriations Committee and the Governor. It does not change your authority. It only clarifies that when you make that recommendation, you are not required to do it with a design amount, a construction amount, and a planning amount. It differentiates the presentation of the budget from the commission to this body and your authority to make a recommendation to the Appropriations Committee and the Governor. But it certainly doesn't eliminate that authority.
Yeah, and I don't see eliminating this language as bypassing our committee at all. And, yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think it's important to understand and read the entirety of the statute instead of just what we have here, because this committee is still the instrumental step between the commission recommendations, department recommendations, and moving forward, moving it on to the Joint Appropriations Committee with or without this specific language. The key change from removing that sentence, which is based on a request, is the idea that we receive a set of recommendations that are delineated and budgeted based on design and planning and construction, but we can now aggregate those by removing that before we forward them on as the next step to the Appropriations Committee through the budget, which is essentially what we're looking for. So we don't have to have what we've seen in the past, which is we have the design funds or the planning and design funds going through, and then they're isolated from the construction funds, which was what we're seeing in Pine View and what we saw in Slade and what we saw in some of the other schools that we've had to remedy. So yeah, I don't see it changing anything in terms of the priority of this select committee in the process. I only seeing it allowing us to decouple from the recommendations as provided. Hopefully I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman and Representative. What I would say is, in review of this issue, that language was the prohibition. That language is the prohibition that would not allow this body to make a recommendation, not for planning and design, not one-to-one to the commission's budget.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Okay. Hearing none from the committee, I'd like to open this up to any public comment. Does anybody wish to address this? Jeannie, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Janine Bateski from Teton County. as I testified at your last meeting when you had this discussion, I am a strong supporter of this one project scenario and the continuum and having gateways along the way that releases funds and rejiggers funds. But I have to tell you, and maybe it's just me, when I read this sentence that begins on the end, on the bottom of page 2 and goes on to page 3, which says, "Nothing in this subsection shall prohibit the legislature from making one appropriation for both the design and construction phases of the project." I read that to say that that would be the exception, not the norm. And I thought that the goal was to make it the norm, that projects were, a unified project would move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Janine. That language, to me, it shouldn't be the exception. I agree. However, I don't take any issue with the language because I believe the department will just do what's best for the project and for, but, you know, anybody have any comments on that thought? Anybody? Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Ms. Teskey's thoughts. I think this gives us a nice starting point and a nice option, which we really have not had before. And I think, quite honestly, I like the flexibility of being able, as a select committee, to recommend whether or not, hey, we don't have a lot of budget capability this biennium, so let's at least get started on these projects. I think we still might want to be able to do that, even though we always run that risk of truncating and shelving and whatever. But this also now gives us the option to say, you know what, if we're going to build the 10 sleep school, let's build it. Let's take that to the Appropriations Committee and make that recommendation so that we are seamless and we don't have to stand down waiting for the planning money to come after design. So I think we're okay.
Might I ask, Tanya, would you give us your opinion, your legal opinion about that being considered an exception rather than is that how you read it?
Mr. Chairman, that's not the way that I read it, and honestly, I'm not even sure that language is entirely necessary. I just added it sort of as a fail-safe in the event that there was ever a question of whether this body, based on historical practices mostly, had the inability to have a single appropriation for design and construction. This sentence would alleviate that.
Backstop. Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss.
And I think you alluded to something I was going to ask, which is if we eliminated this sentence entirely, I don't read that anything would change. Is that your reading?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, no, I don't believe it would change, but I do think it makes it clear that you have the ability for a single appropriation, particularly given the history with these appropriations.
Agreed, thank you.
And frankly, as I mentioned, I don't have any issues with it. I think it's actually clarifying. So, okay, any other public testimony? Anything online? No hands up? Okay, great. Committee, what's your pleasure? Senator Landon moved the bill. Representative Walters seconded. Committee, any amendments that you might want to consider? Okay, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do look at that statement and say, will this change what we're currently doing? Or will it just say, well, you've got the option to change what we're currently doing? And the whole goal of this, in my mind, was to change what we're currently doing. So I'm wondering if we were to put it in such words as this subsection allows the single appropriation or to break it into phases, something where people can start looking at it as, okay, we can make a single appropriation. I would just hate to have this in there and find out everybody's just going ahead the same as it's always been. That's my only word.
Tanya, would language something, rather than nothing in the subsection shall prohibit, would language like the intent of this subsection is to encourage the legislature making a single appropriation when possible, or something more positive rather than shall prohibit?
Mr. Chairman, generally speaking, in drafting, we don't talk about legislative intent. It's a directive. And as I understood the drafting directions, it was to provide the ability for this committee to make a single appropriation, but not restrict them to only making a single appropriation.
Doesn't that sentence provide legislative intent? I mean, shall prohibit, isn't that? No?
No, it's a directive.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't think we should provide that intent and bind future. Honestly, it's disappointing to see something that specifically guides how we shall, which is what we had in 5 and 6 in the first place, which tells us how we shall prepare things. We shouldn't have that in statute. It should really be up to the legislators sitting on this committee at whatever time they want to do it. And if they decide that we were wrong and they want to disaggregate it, I think that's up to them. Hopefully we'll remember, so that there'll be enough people sticking around to remember why we're doing this and then do it in this better way moving forward. But I do think that it's more appropriate for us to make it clear that we're decoupling and that it's up to this select committee to put together the original budget recommendation. And as Senator Landon mentioned, maybe there are some times when we want a little bit of planning or a little bit of design, and we're not going to necessarily fund the entire project, and there might well be a good reason for that. So I think it's important for us to take the tethers off and then leave it to this committee's judgment as to whether or not it's appropriate for a given project to couple the two or not. And as Ms. Heitreck noted, this makes it very clear that nothing shall prohibit is the appropriate way to not have intent there. So I think we're in good shape.
Senator, thanks for your wise counsel. And Ms. Heitreck for yours as well. Okay, so did I answer your question all right? Yeah. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
On 23 LSO-0126, Senator Hutchings. I believe she's giving me a thumbs up. Okay. Senator Cost.
Aye.
Senator Landon. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Harshman is excused. Representative Jennings. Representative Walters.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Brown is also excused, and Chairman Pappas.
Aye.
Alrighty, so it is 6 aye, 1 no, 2 excused.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
7 aye, sorry.
okay. All right, so we'll forward that one on, and again, I'll get with the co-chair and we'll decide where it will go. So that wraps up our morning session today. After lunch, we'll be taking up the School Facilities Commission's annual report and the supplemental budget request. So let's be back here. We've got scheduled 1 hour for lunch, so let's be back at 1:15. Okay, thank you.